Welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to support us. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. Now let's get into the case. The morning sun filtered through the pines surrounding Emma Caldwell's modest mountain home, casting dappled shadows across the wooden deck where she sat nursing a mug of coffee. At 38, the lines around her eyes had deepened, partly from age, but mostly from the weight of raising 5-year-old Ethan alone in this remote corner of Colorado's Front Range. 3 years had passed since Robert's car had skidded off an icy mountain road, leaving her a widow and Ethan without memories of the father who had dreamed of raising him in the wilderness. The insurance money had been enough to buy this small, 3-bedroom cabin 20 minutes outside of Pine Creek, population 2,187. It wasn't what she and Robert had planned, but it was theirs, and on mornings like this, with the scent of pine hanging in the crisp air and the distant peaks still wearing caps of snow despite the late May warmth, Emma could almost convince herself they had made the right choice in moving here from Denver. "Mom, can I go play outside?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, his dark hair uncombed and his Spider-Man pajamas rumpled from sleep. Emma checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. Early, but not unusually so for Ethan, who seemed to operate on the same schedule as the woodland creatures that frequently visited their yard. "Breakfast first, bud, then you can play until your tutor comes at 9. The remote location had necessitated homeschooling, though Emma supplemented with a tutor who drove up from Pine Creek 3 times a week. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. While Emma managed her freelance graphic design business from her home office, Ethan was either learning with Ms. Abernathy or exploring the fenced backyard that bordered the national forest land. The coronavirus pandemic had actually smoothed their transition to mountain life. When everyone was suddenly working remotely, Emma's client list had grown rather than diminished. Ethan sighed dramatically, but climbed onto the deck chair beside her. "Can I have cinnamon toast crunch? How about eggs and toast? You need protein to grow big and strong." Another theatrical sigh, but no argument. Emma smiled as she rose and headed inside to the kitchen. The cabin was small but functional, an open-concept main area with the kitchen flowing into the living room, a master bedroom, Ethan's room, and a third bedroom she'd converted to a home office. Large windows looked out onto the surrounding forest, bringing the outdoors in without the mosquitoes or bears. Bears? Emma frowned as she cracked eggs into a bowl. They'd been seeing more black bear activity in the area lately. 2 days ago, Mrs. Hollister down the road had her bird feeders destroyed, and yesterday, Park Ranger Dave Sutton had stopped by to warn residents about a mother bear with cubs spotted near the creek that ran behind their properties. "Keep your trash secure," he'd advised, his weathered face serious beneath the brim of his ranger hat. "And maybe hold off on the bird feeders until they move on. They're just hungry after winter, not looking for trouble." Emma had nodded, grateful for the heads up, but not particularly worried. In the 2 years they'd lived here, they'd spotted bears in the distance but never had an issue. Their trash was kept in a bear-proof container, as required by county regulations, and she'd taught Ethan the basics of wildlife safety since he could talk. "If you see a bear, come inside right away and tell Mommy. Don't run, don't approach it, just back away slowly and come get me." Ethan had solemnly agreed, likely imagining bears as just another fascinating part of his mountain kingdom rather than potential threats. After breakfast, eggs and toast for her, cinnamon toast crunch for Ethan despite her earlier attempt at nutrition, Emma set up her laptop on the deck to answer emails while Ethan played in the fenced backyard. The fence wasn't particularly tall, only 5 feet of wooden pickets meant more to define their property line than to keep anything in or out, but it gave Emma peace of mind to have some barrier between Ethan and the wilderness. "I'm building a fort," Ethan called, arranging fallen branches against the trunk of a ponderosa pine that stood within their fence line. "Looks great, buddy. Just stay where I can see you," Emma replied, looking up from her screen. The yard wasn't large, perhaps 30 feet from the deck to the fence line and mostly visible from her position. Only a small section behind the storage shed fell out of her direct line of sight. Emma turned back to her work, responding to a client who needed revisions on a logo design. The morning air had warmed pleasantly, and chickadees chirped in the surrounding trees. From the yard came the sounds of Ethan's imaginative play. He was a space explorer today, it seemed, discovering alien life forms among the pine needles and rocks. She'd nearly forgotten the ranger's warning until a loud crash from the direction of their neighbor's property caught her attention. Probably just Doug Miller taking out his trash, though it sounded like he'd dropped the entire can. Emma made a mental note to check in with Doug later. At 72, he lived alone, since his wife's passing, and sometimes needed help with heavier tasks. The next hour passed peacefully. Emma moved from emails to sketching concepts for a new project, occasionally looking up to check on Ethan, who had abandoned his fort building to dig in the dirt with his toy construction vehicles. She'd need to hose him down before Ms. Abernathy arrived, but for now she was content to let him enjoy the sunshine and fresh air. When her phone rang at 8:30, Emma was deep in concentration on a design. She answered without checking the caller ID. "Emma, it's Diane from the general store." Diane Wilkins had owned Pine Creek's only general store for 30 years and served as the unofficial information hub for the scattered mountain community. "Just wanted to give you a heads up that Dave Sutton called, that Mama Bear and her cubs were spotted on Elkhorn Road this morning, which puts them heading in your direction. Thanks for letting me know, Diane." Emma stood up, suddenly alert. Elkhorn Road was the main access road that ran past their turnoff. "I'll keep Ethan inside today." "Good idea. Dave says she's a big one, probably 400 pounds, and her cubs look nearly yearling size. They've been getting into trash cans that aren't secured properly. Our trash can is locked up tight, but I'll do a sweep of the yard to make sure there's nothing that might attract them." Emma moved to the edge of the deck, scanning the yard for Ethan. He'd moved to the far corner, near the storage shed, and was no longer visible. "Thanks again, Diane, I should go." After hanging up, Emma called out, "Ethan, time to come in, buddy." No response. "Ethan!" she called again, louder this time. "Come inside now, please." Still nothing. Emma felt the first flicker of concern as she descended the deck steps into the yard. He was probably just absorbed in play, unable to hear her from behind the shed. "Ethan James Caldwell, answer me right now." She used his full name, the universal signal to children everywhere that Mom meant business. When no reply came, Emma quickened her pace across the yard, her heart beginning to race. As she rounded the corner of the shed, she expected to find him engrossed in some imaginary game, deaf to her calls. Instead, she found only his abandoned toy bulldozer and a small pile of dirt. "Ethan!" The panic rose in her throat as she spun around, scanning the yard. That's when she noticed it, a section of fence behind the shed where 2 pickets had come loose, creating a gap just wide enough for a small boy to squeeze through. Beyond the fence lay the untamed forest, the underbrush thick with spring growth. Emma rushed to the gap, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Ethan!" she screamed, no longer concerned about disturbing the peace of the morning. Her only thought was her son, somewhere in the forest that suddenly seemed vast and threatening. As she prepared to squeeze through the gap herself, a high-pitched scream pierced the air. Ethan's scream, coming from not far beyond the fence line. Emma felt her blood turn to ice. "Mommy! Bear!" The words jolted Emma into action. She forced herself through the gap in the fence, splintering one of the loose pickets further as she pushed through. 20 feet beyond, in a small clearing, stood Ethan, and facing him not 10 feet away was a massive black bear. The bear was on all fours, its head low and swinging slightly as it regarded the small human before it. Even from this distance, Emma could see it was enormous, its black fur glossy in the morning sun, its shoulder hump pronounced as it shifted its weight. Ethan stood frozen, his small body trembling visibly, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face. By some miracle, he wasn't running. Perhaps fear had rooted him to the spot, or perhaps he remembered Emma's instructions about not running from bears. Either way, Emma was grateful for his stillness, even as terror clutched at her heart. The bear made a huffing sound, taking a step toward Ethan. Time seemed to slow as Emma's mind raced through options. She had nothing with her. No bear spray, no weapon, not even her phone. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, she spotted what must be the bear's cubs, 2 smaller forms moving through the underbrush, which explained the mother's protective stance. Everything she'd ever read about bear encounters flashed through her mind. Make yourself big, make noise, back away slowly. But Ethan couldn't back away. He was paralyzed with fear, and the bear was between him and Emma. Acting on pure instinct, Emma began to wave her arms above her head, making herself as large as possible. "Hey! Hey, bear!" she shouted as loudly as she could, her voice echoing through the trees. The bear's head swung toward her, its small eyes assessing this new threat. For a moment it seemed uncertain, looking between Emma and Ethan as if deciding which human deserved its attention. Emma continued shouting, desperate to draw the animal away from her son. "Ethan," she called, trying to keep her voice steady despite her terror. "Back away very slowly toward me, very, very slowly." To her immense relief, Ethan began to inch backward, his eyes never leaving the bear. The bear huffed again, taking another step toward him. Emma's heart nearly stopped. "Hey! Over here!" She clapped her hands together sharply, the sound cracking through the morning stillness. The bear rose onto its hind legs, now standing nearly 6 feet tall. From this posture, it could see Emma clearly, and its cubs, which had moved further, away through the trees. For 3 terrifying seconds it stared directly at Emma, its massive head swinging slightly as if considering its options. Then, with shocking speed for such a large animal, it dropped to all fours and charged, not at Ethan but at Emma. "Run, Ethan, run home!" Emma screamed as she stumbled backward. The bear closed the distance with frightening quickness, covering 20 feet in seconds. Emma turned to flee but caught her foot on an exposed root and went down hard, pain shooting through her ankle as she fell. She rolled onto her back just as the bear reached her, its massive form blocking out the sunlight filtering through the trees. The smell hit her first, a powerful, musky odor mixed with something rotten. The bear's breath huffed hot against her face as it towered over her, close enough that she could see the saliva glistening on its teeth. In that moment, staring into the dark eyes of the creature that could end her life with a single swipe of its massive paw, Emma was certain she was about to die. All she could think was, "Who will take care of Ethan?" Then a piercing whistle cut through the air, followed by a man's shout, "Get back! Hey bear, get back!" The bear's head jerked up, distracted by the new sound. It huffed angrily but took a step back from Emma. Through her terror, she became aware of someone moving quickly through the trees, a tall figure in green and gray. "Get up! Move away slowly!" the man called to her, his voice controlled but urgent. Emma scrambled backward, ignoring the pain that shot through her ankle with each movement. The bear swung its head between her and the approaching ranger, clearly agitated, but hesitant to attack with multiple threats present. The ranger, Emma now recognized Dave Sutton from his visits to the community, continued his approach, making himself appear as large as possible while blowing repeatedly on a whistle that hung around his neck. In his right hand he held what looked like a can of bear spray. "Back toward me, Mom," he directed, never taking his eyes off the bear. Slow and steady, Emma continued her awkward backward crawl until she was several yards from the bear, which remained in place, huffing and swaying. She noticed its gaze frequently shifting toward the direction its cubs had gone. Its maternal instinct clearly conflicted between protecting its young and confronting these human threats. When Emma was about 15 feet from the bear and 10 feet from Ranger Sutton, the ranger called out, "When I count to 3, I want you to get behind me. 1, 2, 3. Emma scrambled to her feet and limped quickly behind the ranger, who maintained his defensive posture facing the bear. Once she was safely behind him, Dave began to back up slowly, one hand extended toward Emma to guide her, the other still gripping the bear spray. "Keep backing up, stay behind me," he murmured, his voice calm despite the tension in his body. "Where's your boy?" "He ran home," Emma gasped, hoping desperately it was true. She hadn't seen which way Ethan had gone after she'd yelled for him to run. The bear took a few steps toward them, then stopped, making a low, woofing sound. In the distance, a higher-pitched call echoed through the trees, one of the cubs calling for its mother. The bear's head swung toward the sound. It rose briefly onto its hind legs again, as if to get a better view, then dropped down and, with surprising suddenness, turned and lumbered off in the direction of its cubs. Within seconds, its massive form disappeared into the undergrowth, though they could still hear branches snapping as it moved away. "Keep moving," Ranger Sutton instructed, not relaxing his vigilant posture. "Bears can circle back. Which way to your house?" Emma pointed shakily toward the gap in her fence, now barely visible through the trees. "Through there. My son. I need to find my son. We'll find him," the ranger assured her, though his expression remained grave. "Let's get to safety first." They continued their careful retreat, the ranger constantly scanning the forest around them for any sign of the bear's return. Emma's ankle throbbed with each step, and she realized her hands were bleeding from where she'd caught herself falling, but the pain seemed distant compared to her fear for Ethan. As they neared the fence, Emma heard the most beautiful sound in the world, Ethan's voice calling from inside the yard. "Mommy! Mommy!" "Ethan, stay there, baby. I'm coming," she called back, relief washing through her like a physical force. They reached the fence and Ranger Sutton quickly assessed the damage to the pickets. "I'll go first, then help you through," he said, squeezing through the opening with surprising agility for his solid frame. Once through, he immediately turned back to offer Emma his hand. She took it gratefully, wincing as she maneuvered her injured ankle through the narrow gap. Once inside the fence, Emma immediately scanned the yard for Ethan. He stood on the deck, his small face streaked with tears and dirt, clutching something metal in his hands. As she limped toward him, she realized it was a pot from the kitchen. He'd remembered the lesson about making noise to scare away bears. "Ethan!" she cried, forgetting her injuries as she rushed across the yard and up the deck steps to gather him in her arms. He dropped the pot with a clatter and threw his arms around her neck, his whole body trembling against hers. "The bear, Mommy! The bear was gonna eat me," he sobbed into her shoulder. "You're safe now, baby, you're safe." Emma held him tightly, her own tears mingling with his as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving her shaking and weak-kneed. She sank onto one of the deck chairs, keeping Ethan clutched to her chest. Ranger Sutton followed more slowly, his eyes continuously scanning the forest beyond the fence. When he reached the deck, he immediately moved to check all sides of the property before finally lowering himself into a chair opposite Emma and Ethan. "That was too close," he said grimly, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "You both were very lucky." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Lucky didn't begin to describe it. If she'd been a minute later finding Ethan, if the ranger hadn't been in the area. "I was just wrapping up a patrol along the creek when I heard shouting," Dave explained, his weathered face serious. "That was a mother black bear with yearling cubs, most defensive and dangerous kind of bear you can encounter. I've never seen one so close before," Emma managed, still stroking Ethan's hair as he clung to her, his sobs quieting to occasional hiccups. "It was enormous. Female black bear, probably around 300 pounds. Big for these parts." Dave leaned forward, his expression grave. "Ma'am, that fence of yours isn't going to keep out wildlife. You need a proper perimeter if you're going to let your boy play outside unsupervised." The words stung, though Emma knew he was right. "He's not supposed to go through the fence. We have rules." "Mom," Ethan interrupted, lifting his tear-stained face, "I was just trying to get my airplane. It flew over the fence." Emma closed her eyes briefly. The toy balsa wood glider Robert's parents had sent for Ethan's birthday last month. She'd told him repeatedly to only fly it in the front yard where there was no fence to clear, but evidently the temptation had been too great. "We need to call this in," Ranger Sutton said, reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. "That bear and her cubs need to be tracked. They're too comfortable around humans, getting into trash cans, approaching people. It's a dangerous situation." "Will they?" Emma hesitated, not wanting to ask the question in front of Ethan, but needing to know. "What will happen to them?" Dave seemed to understand her unspoken question. "Our first priority is public safety. We'll try to encourage them to move deeper into the forest, away from residential areas, but if they keep coming around homes, showing aggressive behavior." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Emma nodded, feeling conflicted. She loved wildlife and had chosen this mountain home partly to be closer to nature. The last thing she wanted was for animals to be killed for simply existing in their natural habitat. But staring into the face of that bear, seeing it tower over her son, those abstract environmental ethics had vanished in an instant, replaced by the primal instinct to protect her child at all costs. "Let me take a look at that ankle," Dave said, nodding toward Emma's foot. She'd propped it up on another chair, and even through her hiking sock she could see it was already swelling. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though now that the adrenaline was fading, the pain was becoming more insistent. "Just twisted it when I fell." "Mom, you're bleeding." Ethan pointed to her hands, his eyes wide, with renewed concern. Emma looked down to see that her palms were indeed scraped raw, with small bits of dirt and pine needles embedded in the skin. "Just scrapes, honey. Nothing serious." Dave stood up. "I'm going to radio this in, then I think we should get you both checked out at the clinic in town. Those wounds need cleaning and that ankle could be broken." "Broken?" Emma echoed, a new wave of anxiety washing over her. She couldn't afford to be incapacitated. Not when she had Ethan to care for, work deadlines to meet, a household to run alone. "Better safe than sorry," Dave said firmly, moving to the edge of the deck to make his radio call. Emma heard him reporting the bear encounter, their location, and requesting additional rangers to track the bear family. While he was occupied, Emma pulled Ethan close again. "You were so brave, buddy, and smart too, remembering not to run from the bear." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "I was scared, Mommy. The bear looked at me and I couldn't move. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work." "That was exactly the right thing to do," Emma assured him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "If you had run, the bear might have chased you. You did everything just right. Except go through the fence," Ethan said in a small voice, his eyes downcast. "Except that," Emma agreed, her tone gentle but serious. "We have that rule to keep you safe. Do you understand now why it's so important?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "I won't do it again, I promise." Emma kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his hair, pine needles and dirt, and the faint, sweet smell that was uniquely his. She could have lost him today. The thought made her tighten her arms around him until he squirmed. "Too tight, Mom." "Sorry, baby." She loosened her grip but kept him close as Ranger Sutton returned. "2 more rangers are on their way to track the bear and her cubs," he reported. "And I've got my truck just down the road. Let's get you both to the clinic." Emma hesitated, mentally calculating how much an urgent care visit would cost against her health insurance deductible. "I really think we're okay." "Emma." Dave's use of her first name caught her attention. His expression was kind but firm. "That ankle needs x-rays, and those cuts need proper cleaning to prevent infection. Mountain dirt isn't clean dirt. And your boy should be checked for shock at the very least." Put that way, Emma couldn't argue. She nodded, then winced as she tried to stand, the pain in her ankle sharper now that she'd been sitting. Without asking permission, Dave stepped forward and scooped Ethan from her lap. "Let's get you inside first, little man, so you can change out of these muddy clothes. Then I'll come back and help your mom." Ethan went willingly with the ranger, seemingly comforted by the man's calm authority. Emma watched as they disappeared into the house, then leaned back in the chair, allowing herself a moment to process what had just happened. The bear's face swam before her mind's eye, the dark, intelligent eyes, the massive head with its powerful jaw, the hot breath on her face as it stood over her. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm morning sun. She had come so close to death, and worse, Ethan had come so close to being alone in the world. The thought made her stomach clench with belated terror. When Dave returned, without Ethan a few minutes later, Emma looked up questioningly. "He's changing his clothes," Dave explained. "Brave kid you've got there. Most children his age would be hysterical after an encounter like that." "He's always been resilient," Emma said, managing a small, proud smile despite her pain. "Takes after his dad that way. Let's get you inside, so you can clean up a bit before we head to town." Dave offered his arm for support, and Emma accepted gratefully, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. She'd sprained ankles before as a college soccer player, but this felt worse. A grinding pain deep in the joint that made her wonder if Dave might be right about the possibility of a fracture. With the ranger's support, Emma hobbled into the house. Ethan emerged from his bedroom in clean clothes, his face washed but still pale with shock. The sight of his mother limping seemed to upset him anew. "Mommy's hurt bad." "I'm okay, sweetie," Emma assured him, easing herself onto a kitchen chair. "Just a twisted ankle. Remember when you fell off the swing last summer and had a sprained wrist? It's like that." Ethan didn't look convinced, but he nodded, clutching his stuffed wolf, a gift from Robert before he died, tightly to his chest. "I need to wash these cuts," Emma said, examining her palms, "and change into something cleaner." "I'll help Mom," Ethan volunteered, seemingly eager to be useful. "I can get the first aid kit. It's under the bathroom sink." "Good man," Dave said approvingly. "I'll just do a quick check around your property while you get ready." While the ranger stepped outside, Ethan retrieved the first aid kit with solemn determination. Emma managed to clean the worst of the dirt from her hands at the kitchen sink, though the cold water made the scrape sting fiercely. Ethan handed her antiseptic wipes and bandages with the careful precision of a surgical nurse, his earlier tears replaced by concentration on the task at hand. "These are big bandages," he observed, as Emma covered her palms with large square gauze pads. "Big scrapes need big bandages," Emma agreed, trying to keep her tone light despite the throbbing pain in both her hands and ankle. "Can you help me get to my room so I can change?" Ethan nodded, puffing out his chest importantly as he offered his small shoulder for support. It didn't provide much actual help, but Emma leaned on him slightly anyway, knowing it made him feel better to assist. She managed to change from her dirt-stained jeans and t-shirt into clean leggings and a sweatshirt, though the process was awkward with her bandaged hands and limited mobility. By the time Dave returned, Emma had hobbled back to the kitchen with Ethan's help and was sitting with her foot propped on another chair, an ice pack balanced on her swollen ankle. "All set?" the ranger asked, his expression still concerned as he took in her pallor. Emma nodded, then remembered something. "Ms. Abernathy, Ethan's tutor. She's supposed to be here at 9. I need to call her." "Already taken care of," Dave assured her. "I ran into her at the bottom of your drive. Seems news travels fast. Diane from the store called her after. She heard my radio report. She said not to worry about today's session and she'll check in tomorrow." Emma sagged with relief. Pine Creek's small-town grapevine had its drawbacks. Privacy was virtually non-existent. But in moments like this, the tight-knit community was a blessing. "My truck's just outside," Dave continued. Think you can make it? Or should I carry you? Emma's pride rebelled at the thought of being carried, but her ankle objected strenuously when she tried to put weight on it. I can manage with help, she decided, not wanting to frighten Ethan further by appearing completely incapacitated. Between leaning heavily on Dave and hopping on her good foot, Emma made it to the Ranger's Forest Service truck parked at the edge of her driveway. Ethan scrambled into the back seat, still clutching his stuffed wolf, while Dave helped Emma into the passenger seat. What about the gap in the fence? Emma asked as Dave started the engine. Should we fix it before we go? The other Rangers will be here soon, Dave assured her. I'll ask them to temporarily block it until you can get it properly repaired. Your priority now is getting medical attention. The drive to Pine Creek's small urgent care clinic took 20 minutes down winding mountain roads. Ethan was uncharacteristically quiet in the back seat, and when Emma twisted to check on him, she found him staring out the window, his expression solemn. You okay back there, buddy? He nodded without looking at her, just watching for bears. The simple statement broke Emma's heart a little. Before today, Ethan had viewed the forest around their home as a magical kingdom full of friendly creatures and adventures. Now that innocent perspective had been shattered. No matter what happened next, something precious had been lost. The Pine Creek Urgent Care Clinic was a modest single-story building at the edge of town, staffed by a rotating crew of medical professionals who served the scattered mountain communities. As Dave pulled into the parking lot, Emma was relieved to see only one other vehicle present. With luck, they wouldn't have to wait long to be seen. Dave insisted on helping Emma inside, despite her protests that she could manage with the crutches the clinic would surely provide. Ethan walked close to her other side, his small hand clutching the hem of her sweatshirt, as if afraid she might disappear. The clinic's reception area was brightly lit and smelled of disinfectant. A middle-aged woman looked up from behind the desk, her eyes widening as she took in Emma's disheveled appearance and Dave's ranger uniform. Heard there was a bear incident up on the mountain, she said, rising from her chair. You must be the Caldwells. Emma nodded, too exhausted to be surprised by the small-town telegraph system that had apparently broadcast their ordeal before they even arrived. Emma and Ethan, yes. Sarah Winters, clinic administrator, the woman introduced herself, coming around the desk. Let's get you into an exam room right away. Dr. Patterson is already preparing. Is he expecting us? Emma asked as Sarah brought a wheelchair from the corner for her. Diane called, Sarah explained, as if that answered everything. And in Pine Creek it did. Said there was a bear attack and you were injured. Not exactly an attack, Emma clarified, sinking gratefully into the wheelchair. More of an encounter. I fell trying to get away. Sarah's eyes flicked to Ethan, who was pressing himself against Ranger Sutton's side, his eyes huge in his pale face. Why don't we get you both checked out? Jane, she called, and a young nurse appeared from down the hallway. Can you take them to rooms 2 and 3? I'll finish the paperwork. Emma started to protest. She didn't want to be separated from Ethan, but the nurse seemed to anticipate her concern. The rooms are adjoining, Jane assured her with a kind smile. We can leave the door open between them. Standard procedure with a parent and child. Somewhat reassured, Emma allowed herself to be wheeled into a small exam room containing the usual examination table, cabinet of supplies, and monitoring equipment. Through an open door, she could see an identical room where Ethan was being led by Ranger Sutton. I'll wait out front, Dave said once Ethan was settled. Let you folks get taken care of. Thank you, Emma called after him, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. Without his intervention, she might well be dead, Ethan orphaned. The thought made her shudder. Jane helped Emma onto the examination table, carefully removing her shoe and sock to reveal an ankle that had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, mottled with purple and blue bruising. Ouch, the nurse said sympathetically, gently palpating around the swelling. That's quite a sprain. At minimum. Let's get those hands looked at too. Emma unwrapped the hasty bandages she'd applied at home, wincing as the gauze stuck to the raw flesh. The scrapes weren't deep, but they were extensive, covering both palms and the heels of her hands. I'm going to clean these properly, Jane said, gathering supplies from the cabinet. It might sting a bit. I'll manage, Emma said, then raised, her voice slightly to call through the open door. How are you doing in there, Ethan? I'm getting my heart listened to, Ethan replied, his voice small but steady. The nurse has a stethoscope, like my doctor kit. Emma smiled despite her pain. Ethan had received a toy medical kit for Christmas and had spent weeks afterward examining Emma and his stuffed animals for various imaginary ailments. Jane worked efficiently, first rinsing Emma's hands with saline solution, then using tweezers to remove small bits of debris that remained embedded in the skin. The process was painful, but Emma gritted her teeth and endured it, knowing infection would be far worse. "So I hear you had a close encounter with a bear," Jane said conversationally as she worked, clearly trying to distract Emma from the pain. "Too close," Emma agreed, keeping her voice low. "It was going after Ethan at first, but then it charged me when I tried to distract it." Jane's eyes widened. "That's terrifying." "Black bear," Emma nodded. "With cubs. We were warned there was a mother bear in the area, but I never thought—" "No one ever does," Jane said sympathetically. "I grew up in these mountains, and we were taught to respect bears but not to fear them excessively. Still, a mother with cubs is unpredictable." "If Ranger Sutton hadn't shown up when he did—" Emma trailed off, not wanting to complete the thought. "Dave's one of the good ones," Jane said, applying antibiotic ointment to Emma's cleaned wounds. "Been with the Forest Service for nearly 20 years, knows these mountains like the back of his hand." Before Emma could respond, the door to the hallway opened and a tall man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses entered, carrying a tablet computer. "I'm Dr. Patterson," he introduced himself, extending his hand before noticing Emma's bandaged palms. "Ah, better not shake. You must be Emma Caldwell. I understand you've had quite a morning." "That's putting it mildly," Emma agreed wearily. "How's my son?" "Nurse Becky is with him now, but from my quick assessment, he appears physically unharmed," the doctor assured her. "We'll want to keep an eye on him for signs of psychological distress, but children are remarkably resilient. Now let's take a look at you." Dr. Patterson examined Emma's hands first, nodding approvingly at Jane's cleaning and bandaging. "Good job. These should heal without complication, though they'll be sore for a week or so. Try to keep them clean and dry. Change the bandages daily." Then he turned his attention to her ankle, his expression growing more serious as he gently manipulated the joint, noting when Emma winced or gasped with pain. "Significant swelling and discoloration," he murmured, making notes on his tablet. "Limited range of motion. Any numbness or tingling in your foot?" Emma shook her head. "Just pain. Sharp pain, especially when I try to put weight on it." "We'll need x-rays to rule out a fracture," Dr. Patterson decided. "Could be a severe sprain or a stress fracture. Either way, you'll be off your feet for a while." Emma's heart sank. Being immobilized was not an option for a single mother living on a mountain with a 5-year-old to care for. "How long is a while?" "Depends on what the x-rays show," the doctor said diplomatically. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Jane will take you to radiology, and we'll go from there." While Jane helped Emma back into the wheelchair for the trip to the x-ray room, Dr. Patterson moved to the adjoining exam room to check on Ethan. Emma strained to hear their conversation as she was wheeled away, catching only fragments. Ethan's high, excited voice recounting the bear's size, the doctor's deeper tones asking gentle questions. The x-ray process was quick but painful, requiring Emma to position her ankle at several different angles that sent spikes of agony up her leg. By the time she was returned to the exam room, she was pale and sweating, the combined stress of the morning's events and the physical pain finally catching up to her. Ethan had been moved to sit on a chair in her room, and he jumped up when she returned, his eyes anxious. "Mom, are you okay? Did they take pictures of your bones?" "They did," Emma confirmed, managing a smile for his benefit as she was helped back onto the examination table. "The doctor will tell us soon if anything's broken." "My bones are all fine," Ethan reported proudly. "And my heart's beating exactly right and my blood pressure is normal for a healthy young man. That's what the doctor said." "That's wonderful news, buddy." Emma reached out her less injured hand to smooth his hair, needing the physical contact to reassure herself that he truly was unharmed. They didn't have to wait long for Dr. Patterson to return with the x-ray results. His expression was serious but not grave as he pulled up images on a computer screen mounted to the wall. "Good news and bad news," he began, pointing to the ghostly white images of Emma's ankle bones. "No complete fracture, but there is a small hairline crack in your lateral malleolus. This bone here on the outside of your ankle." Emma winced. "And the good news? It doesn't require surgery or casting. A walking boot, strict rest for the first few days, then gradual return to weight bearing over about 6 weeks should do the trick." 6 weeks? Emma's dismay must have been evident in her voice because the doctor's expression softened. "The first 2 weeks are the most restrictive," he explained. "After that, you'll be able to move around more normally, though you'll need to wear the boot for support until the bone fully heals." Emma's mind raced, calculating the logistics. She'd have to cancel or postpone client meetings, figure out how to manage the stairs in their split-level cabin, arrange for someone to help with Ethan, and household tasks she couldn't manage on crutches. all while keeping up with her work deadlines to maintain their precarious financial stability. I understand it's challenging, especially as a single parent, Dr. Patterson said, seeming to read her thoughts. But if you don't allow this to heal properly now, you risk chronic instability and pain that could last years. I understand, Emma said, though her heart was heavy. Whatever needs to be done. The next hour was a blur of activity, being fitted for a walking boot, receiving instruction on crutch use, having prescriptions written for pain medication and anti-inflammatories. Through it all, Ethan remained close by, alternating between wide-eyed fascination with the medical equipment and quiet anxiety whenever Emma winced or showed signs of pain. When they were finally ready to leave, Emma was exhausted and lightheaded. The combined effects of pain, stress, and the mild sedative Dr. Patterson had given her to help with the discomfort of fitting the walking boot. Ranger Sutton, true to his word, was waiting in the reception area, rising quickly when he saw them. Emerge from the treatment rooms. Verdict, he asked, taking in Emma's walking boot and crutches. Hairline fracture, Emma reported wearily. 6 weeks recovery minimum. Dave's weathered face creased with concern. That's tough. Let me help you get home and settled. Then we can figure out what kind of support you'll need. Too tired to argue, Emma nodded gratefully. Sarah, the clinic administrator, handed her a stack of papers. Discharge instructions, prescriptions, a form acknowledging the filing of an incident report about the bear encounter. The Forest Service will want a formal statement, Sarah explained, nodding toward Dave, and the County Wildlife Division. Bear encounters, especially aggressive ones, have to be documented. I understand, Emma said, though the thought of reliving the terrifying experience for multiple official reports was daunting. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm not sure I can manage much more today. Of course, Dave assured her. Let's get you home. You both need rest. The return journey to the cabin was largely silent. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, the morning's adrenaline and excitement finally giving way to exhaustion. Emma found herself drifting as well, the sedative making her eyelids heavy despite the persistent throb of her ankle and the uncomfortable position necessitated by the bulky walking boot. She was jolted back to alertness when Dave turned onto their narrow driveway. 2 Forest Service trucks were parked near the cabin, and 3 rangers in uniform were visible, one examining the damaged section of fence, the others conferring near the edge of the woods. They're tracking the bear, Dave explained, seeing Emma's questioning look, and securing your property temporarily. He parked as close to the front door as possible, then came around to help Emma out while she tried unsuccessfully to wake Ethan. Let him sleep, Dave suggested. I can carry him in after we get you settled. With Dave's support, Emma managed to navigate the 3 steps to her front porch and then into the house, the crutches awkward and painful against her bandaged palms. Once inside, she sank gratefully onto the living room couch, propping her booted foot on the coffee table as instructed by Dr. Patterson. Dave returned to the truck for Ethan, carrying the sleeping boy effortlessly to his bedroom. When he emerged, his expression was serious. The other rangers found the bear's tracks heading north, away from residential areas, he reported, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Ethan. That's good news. She's likely moving her cubs to a safer location after the encounter. Will they be able to relocate them? Emma asked, remembering his earlier non-answer about the bear's fate. Dave sighed, settling into an armchair across from her. Relocation is always the first choice, but it depends on the bear's behavior. This one has a history. We've had reports all spring of a female black bear with cubs getting into trash, approaching homes. Today, she showed aggression toward humans, which escalates the concern. She was protecting her cubs, Emma pointed out, surprising herself with the surge of defensive feeling toward the animal that had nearly killed her hours earlier. Absolutely, Dave agreed. She was behaving according to her nature, but that doesn't make it safe for local residents. The problem isn't the bear, it's the proximity of bears and humans in shared territory. Emma nodded, understanding the impossible situation. She wanted Ethan to be safe, yet she had deliberately chosen to live in bear country, encroaching on habitat that had belonged to these animals long before humans built cabins and communities in the mountains. What happens now? She asked, rubbing her temples where a headache was beginning to form. For the bears we track and monitor. For you, Dave paused, his expression concerned. How are you going to manage with that injured ankle? You're looking at weeks of limited mobility, and this cabin isn't exactly accessible. Emma had been wondering the same thing. The cabin's split-level design meant stairs to navigate. The remote location meant limited delivery services, and the nature of single parenthood meant there was no one to automatically step in during a crisis. I'll figure it out, she said more confidently than she felt. I can work from home, have groceries delivered from Diane's store. Ms. Abernathy might be able to extend Ethan's tutoring hours to help. Dave looked skeptical. What about basic things, cooking meals, keeping up with a 5-year-old? This kind of injury needs rest to heal properly. Before Emma could respond, a tentative knock sounded at the front door. Dave rose to answer it, revealing a petite woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, carrying a large covered casserole dish. Helen, Dave greeted her with evident relief. Perfect timing. I came as soon as I heard, Helen Miller said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Bear attack. In all my years in these mountains, I've never heard of such a thing happening so close to home. It wasn't exactly an attack, Emma began, but Helen was already bustling into the kitchen with her dish. I brought my chicken casserole, she announced, and Doug's putting together a schedule. We'll have someone checking in on you daily until you're back on your feet. Mountain folk take care of their own. Emma blinked back sudden tears. Helen and her husband Doug were their closest neighbors, living a quarter-mile down the road. They had been friendly but not intrusive since Emma and Ethan moved in, occasionally bringing over baked goods or inviting them for holiday meals, but otherwise respecting the privacy that most mountain residents valued. That's incredibly kind, Emma managed, but I can't impose. Nonsense, Helen interrupted briskly. It's not imposing when it's offered freely. Besides, Doug and I raised 4 children in these mountains. Having young Ethan around for a few weeks will be a treat. She peered at Emma's bandaged hands and booted foot. You look like you've been through the wars, dear. Have you taken any pain medication yet? They gave me something at the clinic, Emma said, realizing as she spoke that the sedative effect was wearing off, allowing the pain to return in insistent waves. I'll get your prescription filled in town, Dave offered. The pharmacy will still be open for another hour. And I'll stay until you're settled, Helen added, already moving around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who had been in many mountain cabins over the years. Is Ethan napping? Poor little mite must be exhausted. Emma found herself overwhelmed by the unexpected support, tears threatening again. For 2 years she had prided herself on her independence, on building a life for herself and Ethan without having to rely on others. Now, in the space of a few hours, that carefully constructed self-sufficiency had crumbled, leaving her vulnerable and needing help in ways she hadn't anticipated. Thank you, she said simply, not trusting herself to say more without breaking down completely. Helen seemed to understand. She patted Emma's shoulder gently, then turned to Dave. If you're heading to town, could you stop by our place on the way back? Doug has some lumber set aside. We were planning to reinforce the Caldwell's fence tomorrow. You don't have to, Emma began, but Helen waved away her protest. 5 feet of picket fence won't keep out a determined bear, she said firmly, or a curious 5-year-old for that matter. Doug and the boys will put up proper 8-foot deer fencing around your backyard. Should keep out most wildlife, at least the larger sort. Dave nodded approvingly. Good plan, I'll swing by and pick up what they have ready. He turned to Emma. Try to rest. I'll be back with your medication, and we can talk more about the incident report tomorrow when you've had a chance to recover. After he left, Helen efficiently set about preparing dinner, reheating her casserole and putting together a simple salad from ingredients she found in Emma's refrigerator. The domestic sounds from the kitchen were comforting, reminding Emma of her own mother's presence during childhood illnesses or difficult days. The thought of her parents brought a fresh pang. They lived in Florida now, having retired there the year before Ethan was born. They had offered to have Emma and Ethan move in with them after Robert's death, but Emma had resisted, determined to maintain the Colorado life she and Robert had planned rather than retreat to the humid flatlands of her childhood. Now she wondered if that decision had been pride rather than wisdom. Mom? Ethan's sleepy voice broke into her thoughts. He stood in the hallway, hair tousled from his nap, rubbing his eyes with one fist while clutching his stuffed wolf with the other. I had a bad dream about the bear. Come here, sweetheart, Emma said, opening her arms. Ethan climbed carefully onto the couch beside her, mindful of her injured foot. Was the bear real? He asked in a small voice. Or just a dream? The bear was real, Emma confirmed gently, but it's gone now. Ranger Dave and his friends are making sure it doesn't come back near our house. Is it a bad bear? Ethan's blue eyes, so like Robert's, were troubled. Emma considered how to answer. She didn't want Ethan to develop a fear of the natural world around them, but she also needed him to understand the genuine danger they had faced. It's not a bad bear, she said finally. Bears aren't good or bad like people can be. They're wild animals that do what comes naturally to them. This bear thought we might be a danger to her babies, so she tried to scare us away. She was a mommy bear. Ethan said thoughtfully. That's right. And mommy bears, just like mommy humans, will do anything to protect their babies. Ethan seemed to consider this, his small face solemn. Like how you tried to save me from the bear, even though you got hurt. Exactly like that, Emma whispered, hugging him close. Well, isn't this cozy? Helen said, emerging from the kitchen with a glass of water and 2 pills on a small plate. Hello there, young man. I'm Mrs. Miller from down the road. Your mom needs to take her medicine now, and I've got dinner almost ready. Are you hungry? Ethan nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of someone he recognized but didn't know well. Yes, ma'am. Good manners, Helen approved with a smile. Why don't you help me set the table while your mum takes her medicine? Can you show me where the plates are? Kept? Ethan looked to Emma for permission, and when she nodded, he slid from the couch and led Helen back to the kitchen, his earlier distress seemingly forgotten in the face of a new task and potential ally. Emma swallowed the pain medication with the water Helen had brought, wondering again at the unexpected community support that had materialized in the wake of the bear encounter. For 2 years, she had kept to herself, friendly but not intimate with her mountain neighbors, focused on building a life for Ethan while processing her own grief. Now, in a crisis, these people she barely knew were stepping up without hesitation, offering not just immediate help but ongoing support. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of medication-induced drowsiness. Emma managed to eat some of Helen's casserole, which was indeed delicious, while Ethan regaled their visitor with a detailed account of the morning's adventure. In his telling, the bear grew to mammoth proportions, and Emma noted with a mixture of amusement and concern how the traumatic experience was already being transformed into a heroic tale in her son's mind. Dave returned with her filled prescriptions and news that the tracking team had followed the bear family several miles north, deep into the national forest land. They've moved away from residential areas, which is what we hoped for, he reported. We'll keep monitoring, but for now it looks like they're behaving exactly as we'd want, avoiding human contact. Emma felt a wave of relief, both for the community's safety and, somewhat surprisingly, for the bears themselves. Despite the danger they had posed, she couldn't help but admire the powerful animals and their right to exist in these mountains that were, after all, their ancestral home. By 8 o'clock, the combination of pain medication, emotional exhaustion, and physical trauma had Emma struggling to keep her eyes open. Helen, noticing her drooping eyelids, efficiently put Ethan to bed with a story, then helped Emma to her bedroom. Doug or I will be back in the morning, she assured Emma as she helped her settle under the covers, the walking boot propped on a pillow as the doctor had instructed. And Dave said he'd check in around lunchtime to take your formal statement about the bear. Just rest now. I don't know how to thank you, Emma murmured, already half asleep. No thanks needed, Helen said softly. We take care of each other up here. You'd do the same if it were me or Doug in trouble. As consciousness slipped away, Emma realized that Helen was right. Despite her fierce independence, if any of her neighbors had needed help, she would have offered it without hesitation. Perhaps accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but of belonging to this mountain community in a deeper way than she had realized. Her last coherent thought before sleep claimed her was of the bear, the power and grace of the creature, even in its aggression, the primal fear it had evoked, the strange connection she now felt to it as another mother protecting her child in a dangerous world. Some morning light filtering through her bedroom curtains woke Emma from deep, drugged sleep. For a moment she was disoriented, confused by the throbbing pain in her ankle and hands. Then memory rushed back. The bear, Ethan's scream, the charge the fool Ranger Sutton's timely arrival, the clinic, Helen's kindness. A soft knock at her bedroom door preceded Ethan's tousled head peering in. "Mom, are you awake?" "I am now, buddy," Emma said, struggling to sit up against her pillows. "What time is it?" "Nearly 9, came a male voice from the hallway. Doug Miller, Helen's husband. "I hope you don't mind us letting ourselves in. Helen left her key last night and said to come check on you this morning." Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized Helen had a key to their cabin, though it made sense as a safety precaution in such a remote area. "Not at all, thank you for coming." Doug appeared behind Ethan, a tall, spare man in his late 60s with a neatly trimmed white beard and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades outdoors. "Helen's tied up with a church committee this morning, but she sent breakfast." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "And I've got 2 of my sons outside measuring for that fence reinforcement." "You really don't have to," Emma began, but Doug cut her off with a gentle smile. "Neighbors help neighbors," he said simply. "Now can I get you anything? Pain meds? Coffee?" Both, please, Emma admitted, wincing as she shifted her ankle. The pain was duller than yesterday, but still insistent, a deep throbbing that intensified with any movement. While Doug went to fetch her medication and coffee, Ethan climbed carefully onto the bed beside her. "Mr. Doug made me pancakes," he reported happily, "with chocolate chips and whipped cream." "Did he now?" Emma raised an eyebrow, torn between gratitude for Doug's kindness and mild concern about setting a precedent for sugar-laden breakfasts. "He said it was a special treat because I was brave with the bear," Ethan continued, seemingly untroubled by the memory of the previous day's terror. "And guess what? His sons have a real chainsaw. They're going to cut down some trees to make our fence bigger." Emma managed to smile at his enthusiasm, though the thought of strangers altering her property, even with benevolent intentions, made her uncomfortable. She had grown accustomed to her independence, to making decisions without consultation or compromise. But with her mobility severely limited, she had little choice but to accept the help being offered. Doug returned with a mug of coffee, 2 pills, and a glass of water balanced on a small tray. "Hope you don't mind, but I called Dr. Patterson this morning to check your medication schedule. He said these 2 with food, then the anti-inflammatory in about an hour." "Thank you," Emma said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness, "for everything." Doug waved away her gratitude, his expression turning serious. "That was a close call yesterday, too close. We should have insisted on better fencing when you first moved in, but we didn't want to seem intrusive." "It wasn't your responsibility," Emma protested. "I should have been more careful, especially after Ranger Sutton's warning about the bear in the area. Well, what's done is done. The boys and I will have that fence secured by nightfall, 8 feet high with metal posts set in concrete. Won't keep out a determined bear completely. They can climb after all, but it'll be a significant deterrent." Emma swallowed her pills with water, then sipped the coffee gratefully. "How much do I owe you for the materials?" Doug's expression suggested she had said something mildly offensive. "Nothing at all. We had most of it already from when we reinforced our own place last year. The rest is just neighborly." Before Emma could respond, the sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway drew their attention. Ethan rushed to the window. "It's Ranger Dave!" "Right on time," Doug nodded. "He said he'd be by this morning to take your statement about the incident." Emma glanced down at herself, still in yesterday's clothes, her hair unbrushed, her face unwashed. "I should get cleaned up." "Take your time," Doug advised. "Dave's not in any hurry, and neither are we. Ethan and I will entertain him until you're ready." With Doug's help, Emma managed to make her way to the bathroom, the process of washing and changing excruciatingly slow with her injured hands and limited mobility. The simple tasks she normally accomplished without thought now required careful planning and execution. By the time she emerged, dressed in clean leggings and an oversized sweatshirt that could fit over her bandaged hands, she was exhausted and in pain despite the medication. Dave Sutton was seated at her kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee and listening with apparent fascination to Ethan's detailed explanation of his Lego creation, a complex structure that was supposed to be a bear-proof fortress. "Morning," Dave greeted her, standing as Doug helped her to a chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I wrestled a bear and lost," Emma admitted wryly, settling into the chair with her booted foot propped on another, as the doctor had instructed. "Technically, you didn't lose," Dave pointed out. "You're still here, and that counts as a win in my book." "True enough." Emma accepted another mug of coffee from Doug gratefully. "Ethan, why don't you show Mr. Doug your Lego collection while Ranger Dave and I talk?" Ethan looked disappointed to be excluded, but allowed himself to be led away by Doug, who had quickly earned the boys' trust with pancakes and tales of chainsaw operation. Once they were alone, Dave pulled out a tablet and a digital recorder. "I need to take an official statement about the incident," he explained, setting up the recorder. "Standard procedure for any human-wildlife encounter, especially one involving aggression." Emma nodded, bracing herself for the process of reliving the terrifying experience. "Where do you want me to start?" "From the beginning," Dave said, his tone gentle but professional. "As much detail as you can remember. Take your time." For the next 45 minutes, Emma recounted the events of the previous morning. Ethan's toy airplane flying over the fence, discovering the gap in the pickets, the moment of terror when she saw her son face to face with the massive bear, her desperate attempt to distract the animal, the fall, the bear's charge, and Dave's timely intervention. Throughout her account, Dave took notes on his tablet, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "And you're certain it was a black bear?" he asked at one point, "not a brown or grizzly?" "Definitely black," Emma confirmed. "Solid black fur, no shoulder hump like grizzlies have." Dave nodded. Consistent with our known population in this area. No reported grizzlies in the Front Range for decades, though sometimes people mistake cinnamon phase black bears for brown bears. This one was definitely black, Emma said, the image of the bear's glossy coat still vivid in her mind, and huge, at least to my eyes. Female black bears in this region typically range from 150 to 300 pounds, Dave said. When they're protecting cubs, they can appear even larger, partly because of the adrenaline and fear response in the observer, and partly because they may posture to appear more threatening. Well, it worked, Emma said with a slight shudder. She was absolutely terrifying. Dave's expression softened. You did everything right, you know. Making noise to distract her from Ethan, not running when she charged, staying as calm as possible under the circumstances. Many people panic and make the situation worse. I didn't feel calm, Emma admitted. I was terrified. All I could think about was Ethan. That's natural, but your actions were textbook correct for the situation. Dave turned off the recorder and set aside his tablet. I've got what I need for now. The County Wildlife Division may want to interview you separately, but I can pass along my notes to save you some repetition. I'd appreciate that, Emma said sincerely. Recounting the experience once had been draining enough. The thought of doing it multiple times was exhausting. One more thing, Dave said, his expression turning serious. I need to advise you officially about the bears. We're still tracking the mother and cubs, and so far they've remained deep in the national forest, away from residential areas. That's the outcome we hope for, natural dispersal without intervention. But Emma sensed the qualifier coming. But if they return to populated areas, showing continued habituation to humans or aggression, more direct measures might be necessary. Relocation, Dave nodded. That would be the first option. Trap and relocate to a more remote area of the state. But I need to be candid. That's not always successful. Bears have remarkable homing instincts and can travel hundreds of miles to return to familiar territory. And if relocation doesn't work? Emma asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Dave met her gaze directly. Euthanasia would be a last resort, but it is sometimes necessary when a bear presents an ongoing public safety threat. I want to be transparent about that possibility. Emma nodded slowly, a complicated mix of emotions washing through her. She understood the logic. Human safety had to take precedence, but the thought of the magnificent animal being killed because of an encounter that was, ultimately, the result of human encroachment on bear habitat felt wrong. I hope it doesn't come to that, she said finally. So do I, Dave agreed, his weathered face reflecting genuine concern. Black bears are an integral part of our ecosystem here. In most cases, they're shy and avoid humans. This situation is unusual. The sound of a chainsaw starting up outside punctuated their conversation, reminding Emma of the miller's generous efforts to secure her property. At least with better fencing, the risk of future encounters should be reduced. It will help, Dave confirmed, standing to leave. The most important factor is removing attractants, securing trash, taking in bird feeders, keeping pet food inside. Most bear problems stem from them learning to associate human habitations with easy food sources. We've always been careful about that, Emma said, thinking of her bear-proof trash container and her habit of feeding the birds only in winter. When the bears were hibernating, I know you have, Dave assured her. This wasn't your fault, Emma. Sometimes these encounters happen despite our best precautions. We share these mountains with wild creatures, and occasionally our paths cross in unfortunate ways. After Dave left, promising to check in again the following day with any updates about the bear family, Emma found herself alone in the kitchen, the sounds of construction work continuing outside. Ethan had apparently been enlisted as a junior helper by Doug's sons, judging by his excited chatter drifting through the open windows. The quiet moment gave Emma time to reflect on the cascading consequences of yesterday's brief but life-altering encounter. Her mobility was severely restricted for weeks to come. Her work would be impacted. She had already emailed clients explaining the situation and requesting deadline extensions. Ethan's sense of security in their mountain home had been shaken, and somewhere in the forest, a mother bear and her cubs were being tracked and monitored, their future uncertain because of 5 minutes of interaction with humans. The interconnectedness of it all struck Emma forcefully. She had chosen this life in the mountains partly to give Ethan a childhood close to nature, to instill in him a love and respect for the wild world beyond human development. But that choice came with risks and responsibilities she was only now fully comprehending. A gentle knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Struggling with her crutches, Emma made her way slowly to answer it, finding Ms. Abernathy, Ethan's tutor. On the porch, her arms full of books and a colorful gift bag. "Emma, should you be up?" Caroline Abernathy was in her early 30s with curly red hair and the perpetually enthusiastic expression of someone who genuinely loved teaching young children. "Probably not," Emma admitted, stepping back to allow her in. "But I'm going stir-crazy after just one day in bed." "I can imagine," Caroline said sympathetically, setting her materials on the coffee table. "I brought Ethan's regular lessons, plus some extra activities since I heard you might need more help with him while you recover." "That's incredibly kind," Emma said, lowering herself carefully onto the couch. "Though I'm not sure how we'll manage the payment for extra hours." Caroline waved away the concern. "Don't worry about that for now. Consider it a neighborly contribution to your recovery. Besides," she added with a grin, "Ethan is my favorite student. Don't tell the others." Emma smiled despite her discomfort. Caroline tutored several children in the scattered mountain community, driving hundreds of miles each week between remote homes where families had chosen, for various reasons, to educate their children outside the traditional school system. "Oh, and this is from my sister's family," Caroline added, handing Emma the gift bag. "They heard about the bear incident and wanted to send something to cheer you both up." Inside the bag, Emma found 2 books, a field guide to Colorado wildlife for her, and a children's book titled Bears Are Not for Hugging for Ethan. The thoughtful gesture from people she had never even met brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "The whole community's talking about it, you know," Caroline said, settling into an armchair. "First genuine bear incident in Pine Creek in nearly a decade. You're something of a local celebrity now." Emma groaned. "Exactly what I always wanted. On the plus side, you'll never have to buy your own drinks at the Mountain View Tavern again," Caroline teased. "Every outdoorsman in the county will want to hear your story firsthand." "If I ever have time to visit a tavern again," Emma replied wryly. Between single parenthood, freelance work, and now recovery from injury, social outings were rare luxuries. A peal of childish laughter from outside drew their attention. Through the front window, they could see Ethan helping one of Doug's sons measure lumber, his small face alight with the importance of the task. "He seems to be handling it well," Caroline observed, nodding toward Ethan. "Children are remarkably resilient." "On the surface," Emma agreed, "but he had nightmares last night. I'm worried about the long-term effects. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear." Caroline's expression grew serious. "You're right, of course. Would you like me to recommend someone? There's a child psychologist in Boulder who specializes in trauma and nature-related phobias. She might be able to help if Ethan develops ongoing anxiety about the outdoors." Emma hadn't considered professional help, but the suggestion made sense. The last thing she wanted was for Ethan to develop a lasting fear of the natural world they had chosen as their home. That might be a good idea. Not immediately, perhaps, but if the nightmares continue. "I'll email you her information," Caroline promised. "In the meantime, talking about it openly, which you're already doing, is the best approach. Let him process the experience at his own pace, answer his questions honestly, but age-appropriately." Emma nodded, grateful for the advice. Caroline had a background in developmental psychology before switching to education, and her insight was valuable beyond her tutoring skills. "I should go rescue the construction crew from their enthusiastic helper," Caroline said with a smile, rising from her chair. "Unless you need anything before I steal Ethan for his lessons?" "We're fine, thanks to the overwhelming support from everyone," Emma said, still somewhat amazed by the community response to their crisis. "I never expected." "That's mountain life," Caroline said simply. "We look out for each other up here. You'd do the same if roles were reversed." It was the second time someone had expressed that sentiment, and Emma realized it was true. The independence she had cultivated since Robert's death, the fierce self-reliance that had carried her through grief and single parenthood, wasn't incompatible with community connection. Perhaps true strength came not from refusing help, but from recognizing when to accept it graciously. "Now, should I bring Ethan in for lessons at the dining table? Or would you prefer the deck where you can rest more comfortably?" Caroline asked practically. "The deck would be better," Emma decided. "Fresh air might do us all good." As Caroline went to collect Ethan, Emma maneuvered herself back to the kitchen for more coffee, her movements slow, but gradually becoming more coordinated with the crutches. The prescription pain medication dulled the worst of her discomfort, though it left her feeling slightly foggy and disconnected. Through the kitchen window, she could see Doug's sons, men in their 30s or early 40s, working efficiently to install metal fence posts along the perimeter of the backyard. The existing wooden picket fence had already been removed, and rolls of heavy-gauge metal mesh fencing lay ready for installation. It was a significant upgrade from the decorative boundary that had failed to contain Ethan or keep out wildlife. The sight of Ethan following Caroline toward the house, chattering animatedly about his construction job, warmed Emma's heart. Despite yesterday's trauma, despite the nightmares and the lingering fear she had glimpsed in his eyes when they discussed the bear, he remained fundamentally the same bright, curious boy. With proper support and open communication, perhaps the experience would ultimately become just another childhood memory, significant but not defining. As Emma settled on the deck with her coffee to observe Ethan's lesson from a comfortable distance, she found her thoughts returning to the bear. Where was the massive creature now? Was she leading her cubs further into the wilderness, away from the humans who had disrupted their foraging? Or was she even now circling back toward the familiar territory that had provided easy meals in the past? Despite the fear and pain the encounter had caused, Emma couldn't bring herself to view the bear as an enemy or a monster. It was simply a wild animal, acting according to its nature, protecting its young in a world increasingly encroached upon by human development. The true miracle was not that such encounters happened, but that they happened so rarely given the proximity in which humans and large predators coexisted in regions like the Colorado Mountains. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity around Emma, who remained largely stationary on the deck or couch, as instructed by Dr. Patterson. Caroline worked with Ethan for 2 hours, covering his usual curriculum plus some nature-based activities designed to maintain his healthy interest in the outdoors despite the recent frightening experience. Doug and his sons continued their fence installation, the project growing more impressive by the hour. By mid-afternoon, the entire backyard perimeter was encircled with 8-foot metal mesh fencing attached to sturdy posts set in quick-drying concrete. A heavy-duty gate with an automatic closing mechanism and child-proof latch completed the security upgrade. This should keep most wildlife out and curious 5-year-olds in, Doug explained proudly as he demonstrated the gate's operation to Emma. No guarantee against a truly determined bear, but it's a significant deterrent. It's amazing, Emma said sincerely, overwhelmed by the scope of the project they had completed in a single day. I don't know how to thank you all. No thanks. Necessary, Doug insisted for what seemed like the 20th time. Though I wouldn't turn down some of that apple pie Helen tells me you bake once you're back on your feet. You'll have apple pies for the rest of your life, Emma promised with a laugh. By evening, the flurry of activity had subsided. Caroline had departed with a promise to return the following day. Doug and his sons had packed up their tools after securing the last section of fencing. Helen had arrived with another casserole and enough supplementary groceries to stock the cabin for days. And Ethan, exhausted from the excitement and outdoor work, had fallen asleep on the couch before dinner was even served. He's had quite a couple of days, Helen observed softly as she helped Emma cover the sleeping boy with a light blanket. Poor little mite. We both have, Emma agreed, brushing a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead. But we're lucky. It could have been so much worse. Indeed it could, Helen said with feeling. When I think about what might have happened if Dave hadn't been patrolling nearby, the thought sent a chill through Emma despite the warm evening. So many factors had aligned to prevent tragedy. Ethan's stillness rather than running, her own ability to distract the bear, Dave's timely arrival with bear spray and wildlife training. A minute's difference in any of those elements might have resulted in a very different outcome. Have you heard any updates about the bear? Helen asked as she moved to the kitchen to serve dinner for the adults. Emma shook her head. Dave said they're still tracking the family, but so far they've remained deep in the national forest. That's a good sign. Let's hope they stay there, Helen said, bringing plates to the small kitchen table. Bears that develop a habit of approaching human settlements rarely change their ways. What do you mean? Helen's expression was grave as she settled across from Emma. Once they associate humans with food, it's nearly impossible to break the connection. That's why the rangers are so strict about proper trash storage and not feeding wildlife. One careless neighbor can create problems for the entire community and ultimately for the bears themselves. But we've been careful, Emma protested. Bear-proof trash containers, no bird feeders in summer, no pet food outside. I know you have, Helen assured her, and we have too, but not everyone is so conscientious. The Hendersons over on Timber Creek Road had their trash cans raided 3 times last month because they kept forgetting to latch them properly. And tourists at the campgrounds are even worse, leaving food out, approaching bears for photos. Emma sighed, understanding the impossible situation. Bears were intelligent, adaptable creatures that quickly learned where easy meals could be found. A few careless humans could condition bears to associate all human settlements with food, leading to more frequent encounters and eventually to bears being relocated or euthanized for public safety. "It's not fair to the bears," she said finally. "They're just doing what comes naturally, trying to find the most efficient food sources for themselves and their cubs." "No, it's not fair," Helen agreed, "but it's the reality of sharing space with wildlife. We're in their territory as much as they're in ours." The conversation shifted to other topics as they ate: how Emma would manage work deadlines with limited mobility, whether Ethan would be ready for kindergarten in Pine Creek's small school next fall, the latest community gossip that Helen specialized in collecting and distributing. It was comfortable, neighborly talk that made Emma realize how isolated she had been in her determination to handle everything alone. After dinner, Helen helped Emma navigate the challenge of showering with her walking boot and bandaged hands, a process that would have been nearly impossible without assistance. Then, with Ethan still sleeping soundly on the couch, Helen prepared to leave. "Doug or I will check in tomorrow morning," she promised, gathering her dishes and tote bag. "And I believe Caroline is coming for Ethan's lessons around 9. Is there anything else you need before I go?" Emma shook her head, feeling both grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the coordinated care that had materialized around her. "You've done so much already. I don't know when I'll be able to repay everyone's kindness." "For that's not how it works," Helen said with a gentle smile. "Community isn't a ledger of debts and payments. It's a circle of giving and receiving as needs arise. Your turn to give will come." After Helen left, Emma sat in the quiet cabin, listening to Ethan's soft breathing from the couch and the occasional night sounds filtering in from the forest beyond their newly fortified fence. The pain medication was making her drowsy, but she resisted sleep for a while longer, savoring the peaceful moment after 2 days of trauma and chaos. Outside, somewhere in the darkness of the Colorado wilderness, the bear and her cubs were presumably settling into their own night routine, finding shelter, nursing, sleeping. Despite the danger they had posed, despite her own injuries and Ethan's fright, Emma couldn't summon anger toward the animals. They were simply living according to their nature, in a world increasingly shaped and constrained by human activity. The Machi encounter had changed her perspective in ways she was only beginning to understand. The illusion of control over nature, over circumstances, over her carefully constructed independent life had been shattered in those terrifying moments when she stared into the bear's eyes. Yet in the aftermath, instead of greater fear, she found herself experiencing a deeper respect for both the wild world around them and the human community that had embraced them in crisis. With that thought drifting through her mind, Emma finally surrendered to exhaustion, falling asleep in the armchair beside Ethan's couch, her injured foot propped on an ottoman, her bandaged hands resting lightly on her lap. Outside, the Colorado night enfolded their cabin, the same darkness sheltering both the human inhabitants of Pine Creek and the wild creatures that shared their mountain home. Dawn broke clear and cool, sunlight filtering through the pines to dapple the cabin's windows with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Emma woke with a stiff neck from sleeping in the armchair, her injured ankle throbbing despite the elevation and her hands itching beneath the bandages as the scrapes began to heal. Ethan still slept on the couch, his small face peaceful in repose, one arm flung dramatically over his head in the abandoned posture only children seem able to maintain during sleep. Emma watched him for a few moments, her heart full of the fierce protective love that had given her the courage to face down a bear twice her size. The quiet morning was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the driveway, not the familiar rumble of Doug's old pickup or the official purr of Dave's Forest Service truck, but something heavier, industrial. Curious, Emma reached for her crutches and awkwardly made her way to the front window. A white van with Pine Creek Gazette emblazoned on the side had parked beside her Subaru. A woman in her mid-40s with short brown hair and a camera slung around her neck emerged from the driver's side, surveying the cabin with clear interest. Emma groaned softly. The local newspaper. She should have expected this. Bear encounters were rare enough to qualify as genuine news in a small mountain community, and one involving a child would be irresistible to any editor. Still, the thought of having their experience sensationalized in print made her deeply uncomfortable. Before she could decide whether to answer the inevitable knock, Ethan stirred on the couch, blinking sleepily as he oriented himself. "Mom, why did I sleep here?" "You fell asleep early, buddy," Emma explained, momentarily distracted from the approaching reporter. "I didn't want to wake you for dinner." Ethan stretched and yawned, apparently unconcerned about his unusual sleeping arrangement. "Is it morning? Can I go see the new fence?" The knock Emma had been anticipating sounded at the door, firm and businesslike. "Just a minute, honey. We have a visitor." Using her crutches, Emma made her way slowly to the door, considering how to handle the situation. She could simply refuse to talk to the reporter, but in a community as small as Pine Creek, that might seem unneighborly or suspicious. Better to provide a brief factual account than to have rumors and speculation fill the void. "Good morning," the woman said brightly when Emma opened the door. "Melissa Tanner, Pine Creek Gazette. I'm hoping to speak with Emma Caldwell about the bear incident reported yesterday." "I'm Emma," she confirmed, not inviting the reporter in. "But I'm not sure there's much to tell beyond what was in the official report." Melissa's expression turned sympathetic, though her eyes remained keenly observant, taking in Emma's walking boot, bandaged hands, and the crutches she leaned on. "I understand your hesitation, but our readers are very concerned. Black bear encounters affect our entire community, and your experience could help others stay safe." It was a good approach, Emma had to admit, appealing to community responsibility rather than sensationalism. Still, she hesitated. "My son is just 5. I don't want to frighten him further by rehashing the details." "Of course," Melissa agreed quickly. "We could speak privately, or I could come back when he's not home. The story won't run until Friday's edition, so there's no rush." "Who's that, Mom?" Ethan appeared beside Emma, curiosity overcoming his usual shyness with strangers. "I'm Melissa from the newspaper." The reporter introduced herself, crouching slightly to meet Ethan at eye level. "Your mom was just telling me about your brave adventure with the bear." "I wasn't brave," Ethan said solemnly, pressing against Emma's side. "I was scared, but Mom was brave. She saved me from the bear even though she got hurt." Melissa's expression softened with genuine warmth. "That sounds very brave to me. Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." Emma sighed internally, recognizing that the conversation was happening whether she facilitated it or not. "We were just about to have breakfast, Ms. Tanner. Perhaps you'd like to come in for coffee while we talk?" "That would be wonderful, thank you." Melissa followed them inside, her gaze taking in the cabin's interior with journalistic assessment. "Lovely home you have here. How long have you lived in Pine Creek?" "About 2 years," Emma replied, maneuvering awkwardly toward the kitchen. "We moved from Denver after my husband passed away." "I'm sorry for your loss," Melissa said, her tone sincere despite the professional interest in her eyes. "Many people seek solace in the mountains, though few have quite the wildlife encounter you experienced." While Emma prepared cereal for Ethan and coffee for the adults, a process made laborious by her injuries, Melissa established an easy rapport with the boy, asking gentle questions about his toys and books, rather than immediately focusing on the bear encounter. It was skillfully done, and despite her reservations, Emma found herself warming slightly to the reporter's professional but kind approach. Once they were seated at the kitchen table, Ethan happily occupied with his breakfast, Melissa drew a small recorder from her bag. "Do you mind if I record our conversation? It helps ensure I quote you accurately." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "That's fine, but I'd prefer Ethan not be quoted directly. He's too young to understand the implications of being in the newspaper." "Absolutely," Melissa agreed, setting the recorder on the table. "I'll focus on the factual aspects of the encounter and your perspective as a parent. Would you mind walking me through what happened, in your own words?" For the second time in 2 days, Emma recounted the events of that terrifying morning, discovering Ethan missing, finding the gap in the fence, seeing him face to face with the bear, her desperate attempt to distract the animal, the fall, the charge, and Ranger Sutton's timely intervention. She kept her voice steady and matter-of-fact, mindful of Ethan's presence, though he seemed more interested in his cereal than in the retelling of a story he had lived. Melissa took notes as Emma spoke, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. The bear's size, its behavior, the sequence of events that led to the ranger's arrival. Her questions were thoughtful and focused on the factual aspects of the encounter, rather than attempting to sensationalize the emotional impact. "And how are you both coping now?" she asked, as Emma concluded her account. "Physically and emotionally?" "We're managing," Emma said, gesturing to her walking boot and bandaged hands. "Hairline fracture in my ankle, some cuts and bruises." Ethan was physically unharmed, thankfully. "I had bad dreams," Ethan contributed unexpectedly, looking up from his now empty cereal bowl, "about the bear coming inside our house. But Mom says that can't happen because of our new fence." Melissa smiled gently at him. "Dreams can be scary, but they're just our brain's way of processing things that happened. Your mom is right. The new fence will help keep bears outside where they belong." "Mr. Doug made it super tall," Ethan said with pride. "Even taller than Ranger Dave, and he's the tallest man I know." I saw the fence as I drove up, Melissa confirmed. That's quite an impressive security upgrade. The Miller family's work, I presume. Emma nodded, once again struck by the reporter's knowledge of local connections. Doug and his sons installed it yesterday. The whole community has been incredibly supportive. That's Pine Creek for you, Melissa said warmly. One of the benefits of small-town life, people step up when there's a crisis. After a few more questions about the bear's behavior and the ranger's response, Melissa turned off her recorder. Thank you for sharing your experience. I'd like to include a photo with the article, if you're comfortable with that. Nothing intrusive, perhaps just you on the porch with your new fence visible in the background? No need to include Ethan in the image if you prefer not to. Emma considered the request. A photo would make the article more personal, potentially more impactful for readers who might need the reminder about wildlife safety, and by cooperating with a controlled image, she might prevent more intrusive attempts at photography. That would be fine, she agreed, though I'm not exactly looking my best right now. Melissa laughed. You survived a bear encounter with only a broken ankle and some scrapes. I'd say you're looking remarkably good under the circumstances. The photo session was brief and professional. Melissa took several shots of Emma seated on the front porch, with the new fence visible in the yard behind her, then a few wider angles showing the cabin's proximity to the forest edge. True to her word, she didn't press for Ethan's inclusion, though he hovered curiously nearby throughout the process. The article should run in Friday's edition, Melissa explained as she prepared to leave. I'll focus on the safety aspects, the importance of secure fencing, proper trash management, wildlife awareness. Your experience is a powerful reminder that even with precautions, we're living in shared territory with wild animals. That's exactly the message I'd want to convey, Emma said, surprised by how aligned their perspectives seemed despite her initial reservations. These mountains are their home as much as ours. We need to respect that while taking appropriate safety measures. Melissa nodded approvingly. That's a balanced viewpoint not everyone shares after a frightening encounter. Some people react with fear and hostility toward wildlife after incidents like this. The bear was just being a bear, Emma said simply. Protecting her cubs, searching for food, the fact that our territories overlapped isn't her fault. After Melissa left, promising to email a link to the online version of the article when it was published, Emma found herself reflecting on the interview. Despite her initial reluctance, talking about the experience with a sympathetic listener had been somewhat cathartic. Moreover, the idea that their story might help others in the community take wildlife precautions more seriously gave the frightening ordeal a purpose beyond mere misfortune. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Doug stopped by briefly to check the fence and ensure Emma had everything she needed, but declined to stay for coffee, explaining that Helen needed his help with some church committee project in town. The casual mention of their intertwined lives and shared responsibilities struck Emma anew. These people had built a community in these mountains, supporting each other through decades of harsh winters, summer wildfires, personal tragedies, and daily challenges. Around noon, as Emma was helping Ethan with a puzzle at the coffee table, her phone rang. The screen showed Park Service, indicating a call from Ranger Sutton or one of his colleagues. Emma? Dave Sutton here, came the familiar voice when she answered. Wanted to give you an update on our bear family. Have you located them? Emma asked, immediately alert. Yes, and it's good news. They've moved about 15 miles north, well into the national forest and away from residential areas. We've been tracking them for the past day and a half, and they're showing no signs of circling back toward Pine Creek. Relief washed through Emma. That is good news. Does that mean they won't need to be relocated? If they stay where they are, relocation won't be necessary, Dave confirmed. We'll continue monitoring for another week or so, but the signs are promising. They're foraging naturally, avoiding human contact, behaving exactly as we'd hope. I'm glad, Emma said sincerely, for them and for everyone else. Me too, Dave agreed. Nobody wants to see wildlife destroyed unnecessarily, especially when they're just following their instincts. By the way, how are you and Ethan doing? That new fence looks like it could keep out a herd of buffalo, let alone a curious bear. Emma laughed. Doug and his sons didn't mess around, and we're managing. Ethan had nightmares the first night, but he slept through last night without incident. As for me, well, crutches and bandaged hands make everything take 3 times as long, but the pain is manageable. Good to hear. I'll be stopping by tomorrow to check on you both if that's all right, and I've got some educational materials about bear safety for Ethan, coloring books, activity sheets designed specifically for young children who've had wildlife encounters. They help normalize the experience while teaching important safety lessons. That would be wonderful, Emma said, touched by his thoughtfulness. He'd love that. After ending the call, Emma shared the news about the bears with Ethan, who received it with solemn consideration. "So the mommy bear took her babies far away?" he clarified, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "That's right, they've gone deep into the forest where there aren't any houses or people. Is she still mad at us?" The question caught Emma off guard. "I don't think bears get mad the way people do, honey. She was scared and protective, not angry. And now she's found a safer place for her family, away from humans." Ethan nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Good. I don't want the rangers to hurt her even though she was scary." "I don't want that either," Emma agreed, once again struck by her son's capacity for empathy despite his fear. "The best thing for everyone is for bears to live in their part of the forest while we live in ours, with just enough distance between us. Like good neighbors," Ethan suggested, drawing a parallel with a concept he understood. "Exactly like good neighbors," Emma smiled, ruffling his hair. "We respect their space, and they respect ours." The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Caroline arrived for Ethan's tutoring session, bringing not only his regular lessons, but also several nature-themed books selected to maintain his healthy interest in the outdoors, despite the recent frightening experience. She stayed through lunch, helping Emma with meal preparation that was challenging with her limited mobility, then took Ethan for a supervised exploration of the newly fenced backyard. "He's handling it remarkably well," Caroline observed as they watched Ethan confidently investigating a line of ants near the new fence. "Children are so resilient when given the right support." "I'm trying," Emma said, shifting her weight on the crutches. "To be honest, I'm more shaken than he is. I keep seeing that bear's face when I close my eyes. How massive she was, how close." Caroline touched her arm gently. "That's a normal trauma response. It will fade with time, but don't hesitate to seek help if it doesn't. There's no shame in talking to someone professional after an experience like that." Emma nodded gratefully, appreciating both the practical advice and the permission to acknowledge her own emotional response to the encounter. As a single parent, she often felt pressure to be unshakable for Ethan's sake, to process her own fears and anxieties privately, rather than burdening him or others with them. By evening, Emma was exhausted from the day's activities despite having done relatively little beyond basic self-care and interaction with visitors. The physical toll of her injuries combined with the emotional aftermath of the bear encounter left her drained in a way she hadn't experienced since the early days after Robert's death. Ethan, too, was quieter than usual as they ate the lasagna Helen had dropped off earlier, his normally boundless energy subdued by the continued disruption to their routine. When he asked to sleep in Emma's bed, rather than his own, she agreed, without hesitation, understanding his need for closeness and security after the trauma they had shared. As they lay together in the darkness of her bedroom, Ethan's small body curled trustingly against her side, Emma found herself listening intently to the night sounds filtering through the partially open window. The familiar chorus of crickets and occasional hooting of an owl were comforting reminders of the natural world they had chosen to make their home, a world that contained both beauty and danger in equal measure. "Mom?" Ethan's voice came softly through the darkness. "Will the bear remember us?" Emma considered the question carefully, wanting to be truthful without increasing his anxiety. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Bears don't remember things the way people do. She's probably already forgotten about us as she explores her new territory. But we'll remember her," Ethan said, half statement and half question. "Yes, we will," Emma acknowledged, "but not just with fear. We'll remember to be respectful of wildlife and their homes. We'll remember how important it is to follow safety rules in bear country. And maybe when you're older, we'll remember how brave we both were in a scary situation. Like a story to tell my kids someday," Ethan suggested, his voice already growing sleepy. "Exactly like that," Emma agreed, kissing the top of his head. "Now get some sleep, my brave boy." As Ethan's breathing deepened into sleep, Emma remained awake, her thoughts drifting to the bear that had so briefly and dramatically intersected their lives. She wondered if the magnificent animal was sleeping now, her cubs curled against her in some den deep in the forest, as untroubled by thoughts of humans as Emma hoped Ethan would eventually be by thoughts of bears. The encounter had lasted perhaps 5 minutes from first sighting to the bear's retreat, yet its consequences would ripple through their lives for months, maybe years to come. Beyond the physical injuries and property modifications, beyond the community response and newspaper articles, there was a deeper change, a shift in perspective that Emma was only beginning to recognize. In those terrifying moments when she faced the bear, when she believed she might die and leave Ethan motherless, The artificial boundaries between human life and wild nature had dissolved. She had been reduced to her most primal self, a mother protecting her child, no different in essence from the bear who had charged to defend her cubs. There was a humbling truth in that realization, a recognition of their shared vulnerability and fierce protective instinct that transcended species. With that thought drifting through her mind, Emma finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep with Ethan's warm weight against her side and the sounds of the Colorado night singing through the open window. In the darkness beyond their cabin, the forest continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the human drama that had briefly disrupted its peace, yet forever connected to the small family who had chosen to make their home at its edge. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of adjustments, visitors, and gradual healing. Emma's ankle improved slowly but steadily, the pain receding to a dull ache that flared only when she overexerted herself. Her hands healed more quickly, the scrapes scabbing over and then fading to pink new skin that would eventually bear no trace of her desperate scramble away from the charging bear. Ethan's nightmares decreased in frequency, occurring only occasionally rather than nightly, as they had immediately following the encounter. With Dave Sutton's educational materials and Caroline's nature-positive approach to his lessons, he began to rebuild his confidence in the outdoors, though he remained vigilant while playing in their newly secured backyard, his eyes frequently scanning the forest edge beyond the tall fence. The community support continued unabated. Doug and Helen checked in daily, bringing meals, running errands, and providing companionship. Miss Abernathy extended Ethan's tutoring sessions to give Emma more time to rest and work. Various neighbors Emma barely knew stopped by with baked goods, offers of assistance, and thinly veiled curiosity about the bear encounter that had become the talk of Pine Creek. Melissa's article in the Pine Creek Gazette ran as promised, a balanced piece that emphasized wildlife safety while treating Emma and Ethan's experience with respectful gravity rather than sensationalism. The photo showed Emma on her porch, her walking boot visible but not emphasized, the new security fence prominent in the background. The headline read simply, "Local mother and son survive bear encounter, a reminder of wildlife safety in mountain communities." To Emma's relief, the article generated only a minor uptick in attention. A few additional visitors, some concerned emails from distant friends who had seen the story online, a brief mention on a Denver news station's nature segment. By the following week, Pine Creek had largely moved on to other local matters, though Emma suspected her family would forever be known in the community as the ones who had the bear encounter. Dave Sutton continued to provide regular updates about the bear family, which had remained in the remote area of the national forest where they had initially retreated. After 3 weeks of consistent monitoring showed no signs of them returning to residential areas, the Forest Service officially classified the encounter as resolved, with no relocation or further intervention deemed necessary. That's the outcome we always hope for, Dave explained during one of his visits, now more social than official. Natural dispersal and resumed avoidance of human habitation. This female likely had prior negative encounters with humans that made her unusually bold, but the experience with you might have reinforced the danger of approaching people. So our terrifying experience may have actually saved her life by teaching her to stay away from humans, Emma observed with a wry smile. It's possible, Dave agreed. Bears are intelligent animals that learn from experience. This one got a strong negative reinforcement about approaching humans without anyone having to resort to more drastic measures. By the 4-week mark after the encounter, Emma had progressed from the walking boot to a supportive ankle brace, allowing her greater mobility around the cabin. Her follow-up x-rays at the clinic showed proper healing of the hairline fracture, though Dr. Patterson cautioned her to continue limiting strenuous activity for at least another 2 weeks. The bone is mending well, he explained during her checkup, but ligament and tendon injuries take longer to heal. Push too hard too fast and you risk chronic instability. Emma nodded, resigned to the slow pace of recovery. The forced period of limited activity had actually provided unexpected benefits, more time for reflection, closer attention to Ethan's, emotional processing of the trauma, and a deeper connection to the community that had rallied around them. The frantic pace of her pre-injury life, juggling single parenthood, freelance deadlines, and household management, now seemed unnecessarily stressful in retrospect. "I think the bear did me a favor," she joked to Helen during one of their now regular afternoon coffee sessions. "Forced me to slow down and accept help for a change." Helen's weathered face creased in a smile, Sometimes it takes a crisis to shake us out of our routines, though I wouldn't recommend a bear encounter as the preferred method. Definitely not, Emma agreed fervently. But I'm grateful for the perspective shift, even if I could have done without the broken ankle and terror. Life's lessons rarely come wrapped in pretty packages, Helen observed philosophically, passing Emma another slice of homemade banana bread, especially the important ones. As June turned to July, the physical evidence of the bear encounter continued to fade. The new security fence blended into the landscape as summer vines began to climb its metal mesh. Emma's ankle strengthened enough for her to abandon the brace, except during longer walks. The scrapes on her hands healed completely, leaving only faint pink marks that would likely disappear entirely with time. Less visible but more significant were the changes in their daily lives. Emma had adjusted her work schedule to include regular breaks, rather than the marathon sessions she had previously pushed through. She'd hired a local teenager to help with yard maintenance once a week, acknowledging that some tasks were better shared than shouldered alone. And most importantly, she'd allowed the connections with her mountain neighbors to deepen beyond casual acquaintance into genuine friendship. Ethan, too, had changed subtly. He remained a bright, curious 5-year-old with boundless energy, but a new watchfulness had entered his eyes when playing outdoors. He asked more questions about wildlife, devoured the books about animal behavior that Dave had brought him, and carefully followed the safety rules they had established with a solemnity beyond his years. He'll carry this experience with him, Caroline observed during one of their now regular Friday dinners, watching Ethan demonstrate his bear-aware routine for Doug and Helen's visiting grandchildren, not necessarily as trauma, but as formative knowledge. He's learning to respect nature without fearing it, exactly the balance you'd want for a child growing up in this environment. By early August, 6 weeks after the encounter, life had largely returned to normal, albeit a new normal shaped by the lessons of that June morning. Emma had resumed full client workload, Ethan was preparing for the start of kindergarten in the fall, and the bear encounter had faded from community conversation, replaced by more current local news and gossip. On a warm Saturday morning, Emma sat on the deck with her coffee, watching Ethan construct an elaborate system of rivers and dams with his toy construction equipment in the backyard. The security fence now seemed like a natural part of their property, a boundary that defined their space without isolating them from the wilderness beyond. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor, and Emma smiled as Dave Sutton's Forest service truck came into view. His visits had become less official and more social as the weeks passed, a friendship growing from the intense connection formed during the bear encounter. "Morning," Dave called, climbing from his truck with a cardboard box in his arms. "Brought something for you too." "More bear safety coloring books?" Emma teased, rising to greet him. Her ankle had healed enough that she walked with only the slightest hint of a limp, noticeable to herself, but rarely to others. "Better than that," Dave said with a grin. "Trail camera footage." Ethan, hearing Dave's voice, abandoned his construction project and raced toward the deck. "Ranger Dave, did you bring your special ranger hat?" "Not today, buddy," Dave laughed, ruffling Ethan's hair. "But I did bring some cool bear videos to show you." Inside, Dave set up his laptop on the kitchen table, connecting it to a small, portable drive from the box. "We've been monitoring wildlife movements throughout the National Forest this summer," he explained, as Emma prepared fresh coffee. "Standard practice helps with population counts and tracking migration patterns. And you caught our bear on camera?" Emma asked, setting mugs on the table. "We think so," Dave said, navigating through folders of files. "Female black bear with 2 yearling cubs, approximately 15 miles north of here in the Palmer Creek drainage. Size and markings match our records from the incident." Ethan climbed onto a chair, his eyes wide with anticipation. "We're gonna see the real bear? The one that tried to eat me?" "She wasn't trying to eat you, remember," Emma corrected gently. "She was protecting her cubs. And yes, it might be the same bear, but on video where she can't hurt anyone." Dave nodded approvingly at her explanation before turning the laptop screen so they could all see. "This footage is from about 3 weeks ago. The video showed a nighttime scene illuminated by the camera's infrared technology. A large black bear moved into frame, followed by 2 smaller bears that were clearly her nearly grown cubs." The mother paused, her head lifting to sniff the air before leading her family toward a fallen log that they began to investigate for insects. "Wow," Ethan breathed, leaning closer to the screen. "She's big." "About 300 pounds, Dave confirmed. "Healthy weight for a mature female black bear in this region." Emma watched the footage with mixed emotions, a resurgence of the fear she had felt when facing the massive animal, but also a sense of wonder at seeing the bear family in their natural habitat, behaving as nature intended rather than in the tense context of a human encounter. "They look peaceful," she observed. "That's their normal state," Dave explained, advancing to another video clip that showed the same bear family wading in a stream, the cubs attempting to catch fish, while the mother successfully snagged a trout. "Black bears are naturally shy and avoiding of humans. This is what we want to see. Bears being bears in bear habitat, not interacting with people or human settlements." "Is she still in that same area?" Emma asked. Dave nodded. "As far as we can tell. The Palmer Creek drainage is excellent bear habitat, plenty of natural food sources, limited human activity, good denning opportunities for winter. If she stays there, she could live another decade or more, raising several more sets of cubs." "Good," Ethan said decisively. "I don't want anyone to hurt her even though she was scary." Dave smiled at the boy's compassion. "That's exactly how we feel too, buddy. The best outcome for everyone, bears and humans, is for each to stay in their own territory most of the time." After showing them several more clips of the bear family foraging, fishing, and at one point playfully wrestling, the cubs, not the mother, Dave closed his laptop. "Thought you might like to see that they're doing well. Sometimes after an incident like yours, people are left wondering what happened to the animal." "I appreciate it," Emma said sincerely. "It helps provide closure somehow. To see her just being a normal bear in the forest, not the monster of our nightmares." "Bears are never monsters," Dave said, his expression serious. "Just wild animals with their own needs and instincts, trying to survive in a world where their habitat is increasingly encroached upon by humans. The challenge is finding ways to coexist safely, like our big fence," Ethan contributed, pointing proudly toward the backyard. "Exactly like that," Dave agreed. "Physical barriers, proper food storage, wildlife awareness, these are the tools that allow us to live alongside creatures like bears, without dangerous interactions." After Dave left, Emma and Ethan returned to their Saturday routine, laundry and light housekeeping for her, imaginative play for him. But Emma found her thoughts returning repeatedly to the trail camera footage, the image of the bear family going about their lives deep in the forest, untroubled by human concerns. There was something deeply reassuring about seeing the animal in that context, not as the terrifying force that had charged her that June morning, but as a mother caring for her young in the environment where she belonged. The fear Emma had carried since the encounter, a tight knot of anxiety that loosened but never quite dissolved, seemed to release its hold somewhat after witnessing those peaceful scenes. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Ethan proudly handling the safe tasks like tearing lettuce for salad, Emma found herself reflecting on how quickly life had returned to normal after what had seemed, in the moment, like a world-shattering event. The bear encounter had dominated their lives completely for days, then partially for weeks, and now remained primarily as an occasional reference point, a shared experience that had shaped but not defined them. "Mom," Ethan said suddenly, looking up from his lettuce-tearing duty, "do you think the bear remembers us?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I don't know, honey. Animals don't form memories the same way people do. She might remember that she had a frightening encounter with humans, but probably not us specifically." "I remember her," Ethan said, his small face solemn. "Sometimes in my dreams, but not as much anymore." "That's normal," Emma assured him, touched by his honesty. "Big scary experiences stay with us for a while, but they usually fade with time." "Like when Dad died?" Ethan asked, the connection apparently natural in his 5-year-old mind. Emma paused, caught off guard by the comparison. "Versa. In some ways, yes, though that's a different kind of memory because we love Dad and miss him. We don't miss the bear." Ethan seemed to consider this distinction, but both were scary. "Yes," Emma agreed softly. "Both were scary, and both changed. Our lives, though, in very different ways." Ethan nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and returned to his lettuce tearing with renewed focus. Emma watched him for a moment, marveling at children's capacity to process complex emotional experiences through such straightforward conversations, finding connections and patterns that adults might overlook in their more compartmentalized thinking. Later, by that night after Ethan was asleep, Emma sat on the deck with a glass of wine, listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl hooted from somewhere nearby, and smaller creatures rustled in the underbrush beyond their fence. The summer air was warm and scented with pine, the sky above their mountain home brilliant with stars rarely visible from cities. She thought about the bear, perhaps bedded down now with her cubs in some secluded part of the forest 15 miles north Two mothers under the same stars, each protective of her young, each making her way in a world filled with beauty and danger. The parallel was not lost on Emma, nor was the irony that the event she had experienced as traumatic had likely been equally frightening for the bear, albeit in a different way. The glass of wine finished, Emma rose to go inside, taking one last look at the dark forest beyond their fence. The bear walk-off was somewhere out there, living her bear life according to instincts shaped by millennia of evolution. Emma and Ethan were here, living their human lives shaped by choice, circumstance, loss, and recovery. Their paths had crossed briefly in a moment of fear and danger, then diverged again as nature intended. That, Emma thought as she closed and locked the deck door, was perhaps the most appropriate ending to their bear story, not a dramatic conclusion or neat resolution, but simply a return to natural order, each species in its proper place, carrying the memory of the encounter in whatever way their biology and psychology allowed. Then at the 2-month mark after the bear encounter passed without ceremony, August unfolded in a blur of summer activities: swimming lessons for Ethan at the community pool in Pine Creek, weekend barbecues with the Millers and other neighbors, preparations for the start of kindergarten. Emma's ankle had healed completely, according to her final checkup with Dr. Patterson, though it still occasionally ached before rain, a minor permanent reminder of that June morning. "You've got what my grandmother would call a weather ankle now," Dr. Patterson had told her with a smile during that last appointment. Might predict storms better than the meteorologists. The only other physical evidence of the encounter was a thin 3-inch scar on Emma's right palm where a particularly deep scratch had required stitches. It had faded from angry red to silvery pink, visible only in certain light or when she consciously looked for it. Ethan occasionally asked to see Mom's bear scar, tracing it gently with his small finger, as if reading a story written in her skin. The community interest in their experience had faded almost entirely. Occasionally, a visitor to Pine Creek, who had heard about the local bear incident, would ask questions at Diane's general store, but these inquiries were now met with the casual response of a community that had incorporated the event into its collective history, noteworthy but no longer sensational. Even Ethan's nightmares had stopped completely. His kindergarten screening evaluation had noted him as unusually aware of nature safety protocols, but otherwise developmentally typical, with no signs of lasting trauma or anxiety from his close encounter with Colorado wildlife. Life, in other words, had moved on, the bear encounter becoming one chapter in their ongoing story, rather than the defining event Emma had feared it might become in those first terrifying moments. On a crisp September morning, with the first hints of fall color beginning to touch the aspen leaves, Emma stood at the window watching Ethan board the school bus for his 3rd week of kindergarten. He carried his Ranger-themed lunchbox proudly, a gift from Dave Sutton, to celebrate the start of the school year, and waved enthusiastically from the bus window as it pulled away. The house felt temporarily empty without his vibrant presence, though Emma had grown to appreciate these quiet hours for focused work on her freelance projects. She settled at her desk with coffee, opening her laptop to begin a new design concept for a client in Denver. An email notification popped up as she logged in, a message from Dave Sutton with the subject line, "Thought you might like to see this." Emma clicked it open curiously. "Emma," the message read, "one of our trail cameras captured this footage last week in the Palmer Creek area. Thought you and Ethan might be interested. The bear family is denning early this year. Unusual, but not concerning. They'll likely remain in this area through spring hibernation and next year's foraging season. All the best, Dave." Attached was a short video clip. Emma downloaded and opened it, watching as the familiar bear family came into view on the night vision camera. The cubs, noticeably larger than in the previous footage from July, followed their mother along a game trail, occasionally pausing to investigate interesting scents or objects. The mother moved with purpose, her powerful shoulders rolling beneath the glossy black fur, her head swinging from side to side as she constantly assessed her environment. There was nothing remarkable about the bear's behavior, just a family moving through their natural habitat, unaware of or unconcerned by the human eyes that would eventually view their journey. Yet Emma felt a peculiar connection to the massive creature leading her young through the forest darkness, a recognition of shared experience that transcended the boundaries between their species. "Be well, bear mother," Emma murmured to the screen as the bear family moved out of the camera's range, disappearing into the forest that was their rightful home. "Keep your cubs safe." She closed the video file and returned to her work, the brief glimpse of the bears settling into her memory alongside the more frightening images from June. In time, perhaps, the peaceful scenes would outnumber the terrifying ones, the bear existing in her mind as a complete being rather than just the embodiment of fear from those few, traumatic minutes. Outside her window, the Colorado mountains stretched into the distance, their ancient peaks indifferent to the small dramas of bears and humans alike. Somewhere in those forests, a bear who had briefly intersected with their lives continued her bear existence, carrying perhaps some wariness of humans, but no specific memory of Emma and Ethan. And here, in their mountain cabin, fortified now against wilderness intrusions, their human lives continued as well, enriched rather than diminished by their brief, frightening glimpse into the wild heart of nature. Emma turned her attention fully to her work, the bear encounter settling into its proper place in her consciousness, not forgotten, but incorporated into the complex tapestry of experiences that had shaped her family's life in these mountains. A reminder of vulnerability and strength, of terror and resilience, of the thin boundaries between the wild and civilized worlds, and of the community that had rallied around them when those boundaries temporarily dissolved. The scar on her palm caught the morning light as she reached for her coffee cup, a small permanent reminder of a large transient moment, enough to remember, not enough to disrupt, the perfect souvenir of an experience she would never wish to repeat, but would also never wish to forget. The scent of pine and early morning dew filled the air as Doug Peterson trudged across the gravel driveway, dragging 2 overstuffed garbage bags behind him. The sun had barely crested the tree line, casting long shadows across the clearing where their rented cabin stood. At 51, Doug's body protested against the early hour with a symphony of creaking joints and stiff muscles, but he'd volunteered for trash duty to let his wife and kids sleep in. Besides, the quiet solitude of an Adirondack morning was something special, worth savoring before they packed up and headed back to suburban Cincinnati tomorrow. He yawned, blinking away the remnants of sleep as he made his way toward the communal dumpsters at the edge of the property. Pine needles crunched beneath his slippers, a sound that seemed almost thunderous in the morning stillness. The mountains loomed in the distance, misty blue smudges against the brightening sky. Doug inhaled deeply, appreciating the clean mountain air, so different from the perpetual smell of cut grass and barbecue that defined his neighborhood back home. The Peterson family vacation had been his wife Marion's idea. "We need to disconnect," she'd insisted after Doug's doctor had warned him about his rising blood pressure. No emails, no conference calls, just us and nature for a week. He'd resisted initially. Late August was a terrible time to be away from the office, but now, 6 days into their getaway, he had to admit she'd been right. Even his teenage daughters had eventually surrendered their phones in favor of hiking trails and evening board games. The rental company had sent a detailed email about cabin protocols, something about proper food storage and waste disposal that Doug had skimmed while multitasking on a pre-vacation conference call. Marion had mentioned it again when they arrived, but he'd been distracted by unpacking and settling in. Whatever. Trash was trash, and these bags were starting to leak something foul. He should have taken them out last night after dinner, but they'd stayed up late playing Monopoly, and he'd forgotten. As he rounded the corner of the maintenance shed, the dumpsters came into view. 3 large metal containers arranged in a row with heavy plastic lids. In his sleepy state, Doug failed to notice that all the lids were securely latched except one, which lay partially open. He also missed the scattered pieces of garbage on the ground, telltale signs of a visitor. Doug was 10 feet from the dumpsters when a low, huffing grunt stopped him cold. He froze, the garbage bag still clutched in his hands. The sound came again, followed by the distinct noise of something large shifting its weight. Then, from behind the middle dumpster, a black bear emerged. It wasn't particularly large, as bears go, a young adult male, perhaps 200 pounds, but to Doug it might as well have been a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The animal's dark eyes fixed on him with casual interest as it sniffed the air. Doug felt his heart stutter, then race like a trapped bird in his chest. His mouth went desert dry. Every wilderness safety video he'd half-watched flickered through his mind. Make yourself look big. Don't run. Back away slowly. But his body refused to cooperate with this sensible advice. He stood rooted to the spot, garbage bags dangling from nerveless fingers as the bear considered him. The bear dropped to all fours and took a step toward him, nose working overtime. Doug realized with horror that it wasn't interested in him. It wanted the food scraps in his garbage bags. Last night's salmon dinner, the half-eaten burgers, the fruit that had begun to turn, all of it broadcasting an irresistible invitation to a hungry omnivore. "Hey," Doug croaked, his voice barely audible. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Hey, go away!" The bear paused, seemingly startled by the noise, but didn't retreat. Instead, it huffed again and took another curious step forward. Doug's fight-or-flight response finally kicked in. He dropped the garbage bags and backpedaled toward the maintenance shed. The bear immediately approached the abandoned trash, ripping into one bag with alarming efficiency. For a moment, Doug thought he might be able to simply walk away. While the animal was distracted, he took another step backward. The motion caught the bear's attention. It looked up from its garbage buffet and fixed those dark eyes on Doug again. Then, with surprising speed for something so stocky, it began moving toward him. Doug turned and ran. The sensible part of his brain screamed that this was exactly what you weren't supposed to do, but primal fear had overridden all reason. He sprinted back toward the dumpsters, the closest potential shelter, his slippers slapping against the gravel. He could hear the bear behind him moving with purpose. With an ungraceful leap born of desperation, Doug scrambled onto the closed lid of the nearest dumpster. His slippers skidded on the slick plastic, and for one heart-stopping moment he thought he would slide right off the other side. His hands scrabbled for purchase, fingernails catching painfully on the rough edge of the lid. He managed to pull himself fully onto the dumpster, panting and trembling. The bear circled the dumpster once, then stood on its hind legs, front paws resting on the edge. Its nose was maybe 2 feet from Doug's face. Doug could smell its wild, musky odor, like wet dog and something earthier. He could see the individual hairs of its coat, the moistness of its nose, the curious intelligence in its eyes. "Go away," Doug whispered, voice breaking. "Please go away." The bear dropped back to all fours and returned to the scattered garbage, but it kept glancing at Doug, as if to ensure its strange, tree-dwelling quarry wasn't going anywhere. Doug sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might renew the animal's interest. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The bear methodically went through both garbage bags, selecting choice morsels and leaving the rest. Doug's breathing gradually slowed, though his heart continued to hammer against his ribs. He realized he'd left his phone in the cabin, not that there was reliable service out here anyway. No one knew where he was. His family was still asleep, unlikely to miss him for at least another hour. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beginning to burn away the morning chill. Doug's initial terror faded to a dull, persistent dread as he watched the bear finish with his garbage and move on to investigate the open dumpster. He was effectively trapped, perched uncomfortably on a hard plastic lid in his pajama pants and t-shirt, with only his thoughts for company. He considered making a break for it, but quickly dismissed the idea. The bear was still too close, still too aware of his presence. It would catch him before he made it halfway to the cabin. So he waited, growing increasingly uncomfortable on his plastic island. As the bear poured through the contents of the open dumpster, Doug's mind wandered to the cabin rental information packet he'd so carelessly skimmed. There had definitely been something about bears, something about securing garbage and not leaving food out, something he'd ignored. His back began to ache from maintaining his awkward position. His bladder sent increasingly urgent signals that it needed emptying. The morning sun beat down on his exposed neck and arms, promising an uncomfortable sunburn if he remained much longer. But the alternative was far worse, so Doug shifted his weight carefully and settled in for what was becoming a test of endurance. Time crawled by. The bear, having exhausted the culinary options in both Doug's bags and the open dumpster, began exploring the area more broadly. It sniffed at the maintenance shed, investigated a bird feeder hanging from a nearby tree, and occasionally glanced at Doug as if to say, "I haven't forgotten about you." Doug's thoughts turned to his family. Marion would be waking up soon, wondering where he'd gone. Would she come looking for him? The idea sent a fresh spike of fear through him. He couldn't bear the thought of his wife or daughters walking unknowingly into this situation. At some point, Doug had lost track of how long he'd been stranded. A squirrel caught the bear's attention. It ambled off into the woods, following the smaller creature. Doug held his breath, hardly daring to hope. Was this his chance? He counted to 100 slowly, watching the spot where the bear had disappeared into the underbrush. No sign of it returning. Cautiously, muscles screaming in protest after being held in tension for so long, Doug began to ease himself off the dumpster. His slippers had fallen off during his desperate climb, so his bare feet touched the gravel first. He winced at the sharp stones pressing into his soles, but remained focused on the tree line. Still no bear. He took one tentative step toward the cabin, then another. His legs felt rubbery and unreliable, but they carried him forward. 10 steps, 20. He was halfway back to the cabin when a crashing sound from the woods made his heart leap into his throat. The bear reappeared, apparently having lost interest in the squirrel. It spotted Doug immediately, and for a suspended moment, they stared at each other across 30 feet of open ground. Doug bolted for the dumpster again. This time his bare feet failed to find purchase on the slick plastic lid. He slipped, one leg scraping painfully against the metal edge of the dumpster. Panic giving him strength, he hauled himself up anyway, ignoring the burning sensation along his calf. Safe again, if balancing precariously on a garbage container while a wild animal circled below could be considered safe. Doug examined his leg. His pajama pants were torn, and a 6-inch scrape ran along his calf, beaded with blood but not deep. It stung fiercely, especially when sweat ran into it. Doug tore a strip from the bottom of his t-shirt and bound it around the wound as best he could. The bear, having asserted its dominance once more, returned to investigating the area around the dumpsters. It showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. Doug resigned himself to another long wait. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, the day grew uncomfortably warm. Doug's mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, his lips cracking from dehydration. The cut on his leg throbbed steadily. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, somewhat ironically given that he was sitting on a container full of garbage. His thoughts grew increasingly desperate. What if the bear never left? What if no one came looking for him? What if he passed out from the heat and fell right into the bear's path? Just as these dark scenarios were reaching a crescendo in his mind, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Marion's voice calling his name. "Doug? Doug, where are you? The girls want breakfast!" His relief immediately transformed into fresh terror. "Marion, stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "There's a bear! Go back to the cabin and—" "Call for help." A moment of silence followed, then, "Doug, is that you by the dumpsters? What are you talking about?" The bear, alerted by the voices, had risen onto its hind legs again, looking in the direction of the newcomer. Doug felt sick with fear. "It's a bear, Marion. A real bear. Please go back. And call someone." This time she must have either heard the panic in his voice or spotted the bear, because there was no response. Doug prayed she'd gone back to the cabin rather than coming closer to investigate. The bear dropped back to all fours and began moving toward where Marion's voice had come from. Doug felt a moment of pure, crystalline terror, followed immediately by a surge of protective rage. Without thinking, he began waving his arms and shouting, Hey, you, over here!" The bear paused, looking back at him. "Yeah, you. I'm talking to you." Doug banged his hand against the dumpster lid, creating a hollow metallic boom that echoed across the clearing. The bear hesitated, clearly confused by this change in behavior from the previously terrified human. Doug continued making as much noise as possible, desperate to keep the animal's attention on him rather than on the path his wife might have taken. His gambit worked. The bear approached the dumpster again, standing up to peer at its noisy occupant. Doug maintained eye contact, heart threatening to explode from his chest as he continued his arrhythmic percussion on the dumpster lid. Minutes passed in this strange standoff. Then, just as Doug's voice was beginning to give out, the distant sound of a vehicle engine broke the tension. The bear's head swiveled toward the noise, ears perked. A moment later it dropped to all fours and lumbered toward the woods, disappearing into the underbrush just as a Forest Service truck pulled into view. The ranger who stepped out of the vehicle was a compact woman with a weathered face and alert eyes. She surveyed the scene, garbage strewn across the ground, a barefoot man in pajamas sitting on a dumpster, tear in his pants revealing a bloodied makeshift bandage, and approached cautiously. "Sir, I'm Ranger Michaels. Are you injured?" Doug's voice came out as a croak. "There was a bear." "Yes, sir, your wife called it in. Black bear," she said. "Can you come down from there?" The animal appears to have left the area. On legs that felt like overcooked pasta, Doug climbed down from his perch. The moment his feet touched solid ground, the full impact of his ordeal hit him. He sat heavily on the gravel, not even feeling the sharp stones digging into his skin. "How long were you up there?" the ranger asked, kneeling to examine his injured leg. Doug looked at his watch. "Almost 2 hours." She whistled softly. "That's a long time to play king of the mountain with a bear. Let's get you back to your cabin. I'll need to take a statement, and that leg could use some proper cleaning." As they walked toward the truck, Doug's family emerged from the cabin. His teenage daughters, Emily and Zoe, stared wide-eyed at their disheveled father. Marion rushed forward, face pale with worry. "Doug, oh my God, are you okay?" He nodded, suddenly too exhausted for words. The adrenaline that had kept him going was draining away, leaving him shaky and nauseated. Marion's arm went around his waist, supporting him as they walked. Back at the cabin, Ranger Michaels efficiently cleaned and properly bandaged Doug's leg while he recounted his experience. She nodded occasionally, jotting notes in a small notebook. "The bear's been hanging around these cabins for about a week," she explained when he'd finished. "We've had 3 reports already. It's a young male, probably in his 2nd year away from his mother. That's often when they get bold enough to start investigating human areas. Will you have to put it down?" Emily asked, her environmentalist heart clearly troubled by the thought. Ranger Michaels shook her head. "Not for this. He didn't actually attack anyone, and his behavior is pretty normal for a curious young bear who's discovered an easy food source. We'll set some traps, try to relocate him deeper into the wilderness." She turned a stern eye on Doug. "But this is exactly why we ask guests to secure their garbage and food properly. Bears have incredible memories for food sources. Once they associate human areas with easy meals, it's very hard to break the habit." Doug felt a flush of shame. "The information packet. I should have read it more carefully." "Yes, sir, you should have," she agreed without heat. "But you're certainly not the first tourist to make that mistake, and unfortunately, you won't be the last." After filling out an official incident report and giving Doug a tetanus shot, just to be safe, Ranger Michaels left them with strict instructions about securing their belongings for their final night at the cabin. She also advised them to report any further bear sightings immediately. Once she'd gone, Marion helped Doug to the couch and brought him water and ibuprofen. His daughters hovered nearby, full of questions now that the immediate danger had passed. "Did it roar at you, Dad? Were you like totally freaking out? Can I see your battle wound?" Doug answered their questions patiently, though he downplayed the terror he'd felt. No need for them to know how his hands still trembled slightly, how the image of those intelligent ursine eyes remained burned into his memory. "The main thing," he concluded, "is that everyone's safe, and I learned an important lesson about reading safety instructions thoroughly, and about taking out the trash before bedtime," Marion added with a gentle smile that didn't quite mask her residual worry. They spent their final vacation day quietly. Doug's leg throbbed too much for the hike they'd planned, so they played cards and watched movies instead. By evening, his encounter had already begun to take on a slightly unreal quality, like something that had happened to someone. Erskine's sleep proved elusive that night. Every creak of the cabin's wooden frame, every rustle from the surrounding forest, jerked Doug back to alertness. When he did manage to drift off, he dreamed of being pursued through endless woods by a creature he could hear but never quite see. Morning brought relief in the form of departure. They packed the car quickly, eager to be on the road. Doug insisted on making one last sweep of the cabin and surrounding area to ensure they hadn't left any food or garbage behind. "Don't want anyone else to have the same experience," he explained to Marion. As they drove away from the cabin, following the winding road that would eventually lead them back to civilization, Doug caught a glimpse of movement at the forest's edge. A black shape, partially obscured by underbrush. He blinked and it was gone. Had it been there at all? Or was his mind playing tricks on him? He chose not to mention it to the others. The long drive back to Cincinnati gave Doug plenty of time to reflect. What struck him most about the encounter wasn't the fear, though there had been plenty of that, but the sense of perspective it had forced upon him. Balanced on that dumpster, watching a wild creature go about its business with complete indifference to his discomfort, he'd felt both insignificant and intensely alive in a way his everyday existence rarely allowed. They arrived home late Sunday, evening to a house that felt simultaneously strange and familiar. The girls disappeared into their rooms to reconnect with the digital world they'd been separated from. Marion unpacked methodically, already mentally preparing for her return to teaching the following day. Doug wandered through the rooms feeling oddly disconnected from the comfortable domesticity that had seemed so essential just a week ago. Monday morning, he called in sick for the first time in 3 years. His leg was sore but healing well. That wasn't the real reason. He simply couldn't face returning to his office, to spreadsheets and meetings and artificial urgency so soon after his brush with something authentic and primal. Instead, he spent the day researching black bears. He learned about their habitats, their behaviors, their remarkable adaptability to human encroachment on their territories. He read about conservation efforts and the challenges of managing human-wildlife interactions in places like the Adirondacks. He even found himself on forums dedicated to bear encounters, reading stories from others who had experienced similar run-ins. Marion found him still at the computer when she returned from school. "Becoming a bear expert?" she asked, peering over his shoulder at an article about bear-proof garbage containers. "Just trying to understand," he replied. "I keep thinking about what the ranger said, how once they associate humans with food, it's hard to break the habit. We're effectively training them to be nuisances, then punishing them for it. She rested a hand on his shoulder. You can't blame yourself for not knowing better, Doug. I did know better, he admitted. Or I should have. The information was right there in the rental packet. I just didn't think it applied to me somehow. That night at dinner, Doug told his family he'd decided to write an article about his experience for the local newspaper. Just a cautionary tale for other vacationers, he explained. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid my mistakes. His editor at the Cincinnati Observer, where Doug occasionally contributed opinion pieces on local business issues, was initially skeptical about the bear story. It's a bit outside your usual beat, Warren pointed out during their phone call. That's why it's interesting, Doug countered. Anyway, it's not really about the bear. It's about hubris, about thinking the rules don't apply to you until suddenly you're trapped on a dumpster for 2 hours contemplating your poor life choices. Warren laughed. When you put it that way, how can I refuse but keep it under 1,000 words? The article, titled Dumpster Diving, My Too Close Encounter with an Adirondack Black Bear, ran in the following Sunday's edition. Doug described his experience with self-deprecating humor, but included serious information about bear safety and the importance of responsible behavior in wildlife areas. He concluded with a plea for greater awareness of how human actions affect wild animals. The piece generated more response than anything else he'd written. Most readers appreciated his candor and the safety information. A few shared their own wildlife encounter stories. The local park district asked permission to reprint the article in their quarterly newsletter. Encouraged by the response, Doug found himself becoming something of an amateur advocate for wildlife safety. He ordered bear-proof garbage containers for his own home. Despite the nearest wild bear population being hundreds of miles away, he volunteered to give a presentation at his daughter's high school about wilderness safety. He joined a conservation organization focused on preserving black bear habitats in the eastern United States. Marion observed these developments with amused tolerance. "You're becoming a regular bear whisperer," she teased. "Should I be worried?" "Just making something positive out of a stupid mistake," Doug replied. But it was more than that. The encounter had awakened something in him, a recognition of how insulated his life had become, how disconnected from the natural world and its inherent risks and rewards. The scrape on his leg healed slowly, eventually forming a pale, 6-inch scar that Doug found himself touching absently during meetings or while watching television. It was his only tangible evidence that the encounter had happened at all. No photographs, no video, just his memory and this mark on his body. Sometimes, in the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, he would find himself back on that dumpster, locked in a silent communion with a creature from another world. In these half-dreams, the fear was muted, replaced by a strange sense of privilege, as if he had been granted a rare glimpse behind the veil of ordinary existence. 6 weeks after their return, Doug received an email from Ranger Michaels. She remembered him, she wrote, because bear encounters that resulted in injury, however minor, required follow-up reports. The young male bear that had likely been his dumpster companion had been successfully trapped and relocated to a more remote area of the forest preserve. She included a photo of the sedated animal being transported in the back of a Forest Service truck. Doug stared at the image for a long time. The bear looked smaller somehow, less mythic than the creature in his memory, just an ordinary wild animal trying to survive in a world increasingly shaped by human activity. He forwarded the email to Marion with a note. "My friend from the Adirondacks has been relocated. Good news, I guess." Her reply came a few minutes later. "Glad to hear it, though I bet he misses those salmon scraps you served him." Doug smiled, but the news left him with an unexpected melancholy. The bear would live out its life in the deeper wilderness, perhaps never encountering humans again, but Doug would carry their brief, intense connection forever, his own private wilderness preserved in memory. As autumn deepened toward winter, Doug's bear advocacy gradually became less of a focal point in his life. The scar on his leg faded from angry red to silvery white. His colleagues stopped asking him to retell the bear story at office gatherings. Life returned to its familiar rhythms. But something fundamental had shifted. Doug found himself paying more attention to the natural world, even in his suburban environment. He noticed seasonal changes in the sky, neighborhood trees, observed the behaviors of squirrels and raccoons that visited their yard, developed a nascent interest in birdwatching. The bear encounter had sensitized him to a dimension of existence he'd previously overlooked. For Halloween, his daughter suggested he dress as a park ranger or a bear attack victim. Doug declined, oddly protective of an experience that had begun to feel intensely personal, despite his public sharing of it. Instead, he stayed home to hand out candy, watching through the window as costumed children navigated the increasingly chilly evening. Around midnight, after the last trick-or-treaters had gone and the household was quiet, Doug stepped onto the back deck. The suburban night was never truly dark. Too many streetlights, porch lights, ambient glow from neighboring houses. But if he focused on the patch of sky directly overhead, he could make out a few stubborn stars piercing the light pollution. He thought about his counterpart in the Adirondack wilderness. Was the bear gazing at these same stars, perhaps from a rocky outcrop in its new territory? Was it adapting to its changed circumstances as Doug was adapting to his subtly altered perspective? These anthropomorphic musings embarrassed him slightly, but he allowed them anyway. The encounter had created a connection, one-sided and fleeting perhaps, but real nonetheless. In those intense hours on the dumpster, Doug had been forced to recognize himself as part of the natural world, not merely an observer or consumer of it. That recognition, once achieved, could not be unlearned. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year. Heavy snowfalls blanketed Cincinnati in December, closing schools and offices. Doug spent a rare snow day helping his daughters build an elaborate snow fort in the backyard. As they worked, he found himself telling them about winter adaptations of black bears. Not hibernation exactly, but a deep torpor in which they could remain for months, living off accumulated fat reserves. "Dad," Zoe sighed with teenage exasperation, "not everything has to be a bear lesson." Doug laughed, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "You're right, sorry, pass me that snow shovel, would you?" But later, he overheard Zoe sharing the hibernation facts with a friend who'd come over to enjoy the snow fort. Perhaps some of his newfound enthusiasm was rubbing off after all. In January, Doug received an invitation to speak at a regional outdoor recreation conference about wildlife safety awareness for vacationers. The organizer had read his newspaper article and thought his perspective as an ordinary person who learned the hard way would resonate with attendees. Doug's first instinct was to decline. He wasn't an expert, just someone who'd made a foolish mistake and been lucky enough to walk away with only a scar. But Marion encouraged him to accept. "Your story might help someone else avoid a worse outcome," she pointed out. "Isn't that worth a little discomfort?" So he agreed, spending several evenings preparing a presentation that balanced his personal experience with practical safety information. He contacted Ranger Michaels again, who generously provided additional materials and facts about black bear behavior and the challenges of wildlife management in popular recreation areas. The conference was held at a hotel near the Cincinnati airport. Doug arrived early, nervous but prepared. His session was scheduled between a talk on modern camping equipment and a panel discussion about improving accessibility in national parks. About 40 people filled the conference room, a mix of outdoor enthusiasts, recreation industry professionals, and park management personnel. As Doug recounted his bear encounter, now 6 months in the past but still vivid in his memory, he was struck by how engaged the audience seemed. They laughed at his self-deprecating humor, nodded at his safety recommendations, and asked thoughtful questions afterward. One park administrator even requested permission to use his story in their visitor orientation materials. "I'm just glad something constructive came out of my stupidity," Doug told her. "It's not stupidity," she corrected him. "It's inexperience, and the only cure for that is education, which is exactly what you're providing now." Driving home from the conference, Doug felt a sense of closure. He had transformed an incident of personal carelessness into something potentially beneficial for others. The circle was complete, or so he thought. In March, as winter reluctantly yielded to spring, Doug received another email from Ranger Michaels. She had news that she thought might interest him. The young male, Bear, his bear as Doug had come to think of it, had recently been spotted back in the vicinity of the rental cabins. It had apparently traveled nearly 30 miles from its relocation site, navigating through challenging terrain and potentially crossing roads to return to the area where it had previously found easy food. "This isn't uncommon," Ranger Michaels explained in her message. "Bears have exceptional spatial memory and can travel remarkable distances to return to known food sources. It's why we emphasize prevention so strongly. Once they've learned that human areas mean easy meals, that association is extremely difficult to break." The bear had been trapped again and would be relocated to an even more remote area with natural barriers that would hopefully discourage another return journey. "But I wanted you to know," she concluded, because your interest in bear conservation seemed genuine, and this illustrates the ongoing challenges we face in human-wildlife conflict management. Doug sat with this information for a long time, emotions cycling between wonder at the bear's navigational abilities, concern for its future, and a strange sense of personal connection renewed. That the animal had made such an arduous journey to return to a place where their paths had briefly crossed seemed significant somehow, though he recognized the scientific reality that the bear was motivated by memory of food, not by any awareness of their encounter. He shared the news with Marion over dinner. "Sounds like you made quite an impression," she joked. "Should I be jealous?" "Very funny," Doug replied, "but it does make me wonder how many other bears are out there getting into similar situations because people like me don't take the warning seriously enough." "You could help with that," Marion suggested. "You've already written the article and done the conference presentation. Maybe there's more you could do." The idea took root. Over the following weeks, Doug researched community education initiatives related to wildlife safety. He discovered that even in areas far from bear country, there were opportunities to promote greater awareness of responsible interaction with local wildlife: raccoons, deer, coyotes, even aggressive geese in city parks. He approached the Cincinnati Parks Department with a proposal for a series of family-oriented workshops on urban wildlife awareness. To his surprise, they were enthusiastic about the idea, especially when he offered to develop and lead the programs as a volunteer. The first workshop, held in a popular city park on a sunny April Saturday, attracted a dozen families with children of various ages. Doug had prepared age-appropriate activities about local wildlife, focusing on recognition, respect, and responsible behavior. The children particularly enjoyed the "What Does a Raccoon Want" game, which demonstrated how human food and garbage attracted urban wildlife. As Doug watched the children engage with the materials he'd created, he felt a deep satisfaction that transcended the lingering embarrassment of his bear encounter. From that moment of pure animal fear on the dumpster had emerged a thread of purpose he could never have anticipated. Over the following months, the workshops expanded to more parks and community centers. Doug recruited high school environmental club members as volunteers, giving them community service hours for their college applications. He developed additional modules focusing on different aspects of human-wildlife interaction, always emphasizing that wild animals were neither pets to be approached nor monsters to be feared, simply creatures following their natural instincts in environments increasingly shaped by human activity. His daughters, initially skeptical of their father's bear obsession, gradually came to respect his commitment. Emily, the elder, even incorporated some of his workshop materials into a school project on environmental education, earning praise from her biology teacher. A year after the Adirondack incident, Doug's Wildlife Awareness Initiative had become a recognized program within the Cincinnati Parks system. Local elementary schools arranged field trips to attend his presentations. The city's waste management department consulted him on animal-resistant garbage container options for problem areas. Marion watched this evolution with a mixture of pride and bemusement. "When I suggested that vacation to help you relax," she told him one evening, "I had no idea it would lead to all this." "Life's funny that way," Doug replied. "One minute, you're taking out the garbage. The next, you're running wildlife workshops and investigating bear-proof trash cans." The scar on his leg had faded to a thin white line, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. But its presence remained a tangible reminder of vulnerability and consequence, a personal totem of an encounter that had shifted, something fundamental in his worldview. On the anniversary of the bear incident, Doug found himself thinking often of his unwitting adversary. Had it remained in its new, more remote location, or had it once again navigated back to the siren call of human food sources? He was tempted to email Ranger Michaels for an update, but decided against it. Better perhaps to imagine the bear living wild and free in the deep forest, finding natural food sources and avoiding human contact. That evening, he walked alone in their neighborhood park, observing the familiar urban wildlife with newly appreciative eyes. A pair of mallards paddled in the small pond. Squirrels chased each other through the trees. A robin tugged at a worm on the recently watered lawn. Doug sat on a bench, watching the lengthening shadows as the sun began to set. A few other people moved through the park, a jogger, an elderly couple, a woman walking a small dog. All of them, like Doug, existing simultaneously within and apart from the natural world that surrounded them. He thought about the bear again, picturing it moving through the gathering darkness of the Adirondack forest, powerful and purposeful, in its native environment. In that moment, the distance between Cincinnati and the Adirondacks seemed to collapse. Doug felt connected to something larger than himself, a complex, interconnected system of life in which his brief encounter with a wild creature was both insignificant and profoundly meaningful. The feeling wasn't entirely comfortable, carrying with it echoes of the vulnerability he'd experienced on the dumpster. But it was real, and Doug had come to value that reality over the comfortable illusions of separation and control that had characterized his pre-bear existence. As darkness fell completely, he rose from the bench and began walking home. Tomorrow would bring more workshops to plan, more children to educate, more small efforts to foster understanding between the human and non-human worlds. It wasn't the life path he'd imagined for himself, but it had emerged organically from a single transformative experience, a moment of truth between man and bear that had revealed aspects of both that might otherwise have remained hidden. Doug smiled slightly, touching the scar on his leg through his pants. Some lessons, it seemed, could only be learned the hard way, but once learned, they were not easily forgotten. In his mind's eye, he saw the bear once more, not as the terrifying creature of his nightmares or the anthropomorphized character of his occasional whimsy, but simply as it was, a wild animal moving through the world according to its nature, intersecting briefly with human lives before continuing on its solitary journey through the ancient forests that had sheltered its kind, long before humans built their cabins and strung up their bird feeders and disposed of their salmon scraps in flimsy plastic bags. As Doug walked beneath the artificial glow of suburban streetlights, that image stayed with him, a talisman against complacency, a reminder of wildness not entirely erased from the world and of his own place within it, not central, not separate, but connected in ways both visible and invisible to everything that lived and breathed beneath the same stars. And somewhere in the vast darkness of the Adirondack wilderness, a black bear moved through the forest, following the imperatives of its nature, hunting, foraging, surviving, carrying no memory of a frightened man on a dumpster, no awareness of how profoundly that brief encounter had altered a human life. It simply continued on, wild and free, embodying a truth that Doug Peterson had once forgotten but would never again fail to recognize, that we are all, in the end, just creatures sharing a world bigger and more mysterious than our human understanding can fully encompass.